Hey, I've been quietly observing here for a bit, dealing with the whole cheating thing in my life. My wife and I have been married for 8 years, a bit longer if you count the time we've been together, and we have 2 young kids. This year has been rough, with some arguments, but nothing I thought would lead my wife to cheat. Recently, I noticed her being distant and uncommunicative, so I confronted her one evening. She admitted she wasn't happy and felt no spark. Initially, I blamed myself for not being attentive, which was true. The next day, I found a really lovey-dovey message on her phone. I discovered she'd been messaging a guy for a long time with lots of I love yous and plans for a future together. It hit me hard. Following advice from various threads, I didn't confront immediately. I read a lot, consulted a couple of lawyers, one on retainer now, got my head straight, and stayed calm. A couple of days ago, I calmly confronted my wife and asked if she was having an affair. After a few minutes, she admitted everything. Long story short, it's been going on for 6 months and she claims it's the deepest emotional connection ever. Complete BS. Anyway, I set boundaries, cut off contact, suggested marriage counseling, and more. The breaking point came when she resisted cutting off contact, even when I asked her to do it in front of me and insisted on seeing him one last time. I stood my ground and told her if he's so important, pack a bag and go live with him. She backed off, calling me a controlling yank. She sent a text this morning, but I suspect she'll try a different means of communication. I don't see much hope, and I honestly don't want it at this point. I just want to be able to tell my kids in 20 years that I tried. We have marriage counseling tomorrow, but I'm leaning toward filing before wasting more time. I'm cautious due to my kids, but is this the right move? I have the paperwork filled out with my lawyer. They just need to process it, and I'll pick a date to have her served. Going the doormat route won't end well. I need to think about my future, my kids, and move on. Update. The past few weeks have been really tough, but they've given me time to think and reflect. My wife and I went to counseling after our first big talk, and I must say, the counselor was great at listening to both of us without blaming anyone. She helped us navigate our new reality and pointed out some issues in our relationship. While it doesn't excuse my wife's behavior, it's good to know for the future to avoid making the same mistakes. As mentioned, my wife didn't seem to follow my request to cut off contact with the affair partner. I noticed some messages before she went completely silent. After seeing that, I decided to file for divorce, and she was served a few days ago. At the same time, I had a heart-to-heart with my father-in-law, who I'm really close to, prioritizing support for our kids over our relationship. It seemed like my wife wanted to ignore the issue. Naturally, my wife was really upset at first. Her fantasy was shattered, but our therapist talked through why this needed to happen from my perspective. I think she's starting to realize the consequences of her actions and the real things that will be lost. I'm just trying to process the new life ahead and the big change in my identity from being a husband and father to something else. Similarly, since I filed, my wife was shocked, and she's been very emotional these past few days. I honestly think she never expected me to walk away. I've kept my distance, but I've seen a noticeable change in her. On a positive note, we've talked more, kept our conversations civil, and focused on our shared priorities, especially our children. I've made it clear that she caused a huge wound, and she needs to do the heavy lifting to help repair it and give me space and time. If I can ever start to forgive, I'll say it again and again. Her actions are the most selfish, self-centered, and horrible things you could do to a person. But I haven't lost sight of the fact that we still need to raise our children. That's my main focus as I figure out how to move forward to the next phase of my personal happiness. I'm honestly proud that I found the strength not to dwell in self-pity, anger, or sadness, and to make the right moves to keep my dignity and look forward to a brighter future. I don't know all the next steps, and my feelings are constantly changing, but I'm starting to feel some inner peace. I'm in the post-serving phase and working closely with my counsel. What I'm wondering is if any betrayed spouses here took advantage of the affair fog to get better divorce terms and how they managed it. My soon-to-be ex-wife is clearly deep in the fog, still contacting the affair partner, and at the moment, I haven't bothered her about it. Update. My wife cheated, forming a stronger emotional connection with someone else. We still love each other, but aren't in love anymore. I filed for divorce, and it's been about a month and a half since everything came to light. I'm working hard to move forward. The process is ongoing, and I'll share updates when the time is right, probably in a while. If you've been through this, I'd appreciate any advice, lessons learned, or things you wish you had known. Just reaching out in case there's more helpful information. I filed for divorce, and things are moving in that direction. I'd like to hear how others dealt with in-laws and friends, especially when they try to make you look like the bad guy. After filing, I informed some in-laws, my family, and a few friends, but I didn't make it widely known to keep some things private. However, it seems my soon-to-be ex-wife has shared her side, and I'm getting cold vibes from her family and others. It's tough when close family turns their backs, even though I've been a good dad and my wife has acted immorally. Did people eventually see the truth and change their opinions? Or did they just move on? While it's natural for people to take sides, those who believe her probably weren't loyal to you anyway. You don't need people like that. Focus on your kids and your side of the story. At the end of the day, you know what happened, and that's what matters. Update. Today brings some closure to the saga that began last summer, during which I sought advice from everyone here. Going through this process is tough, especially when close family is far away. It's challenging to be alone with your thoughts, but there's wisdom and introspection to gain. To recap, my wife cheated, and I found out, realizing there was no hope as she was deeply involved with the affair partner. I filed for divorce immediately. The past few months have been frosty but relatively drama-free as my soon-to-be ex and I separated our lives in the house while still co-parenting. The discovery and mediation process moved quickly. We agreed on 50 custody for our kids along with schedules and holidays. Asset division in our no-fault state followed the book with some give and take. The final conclusion is on the horizon, and for the most part the divorce is complete. As for advice from this fiasco, I learned several things. First, don't bother with the pick-me dance. I tried for a week before realizing her decision to cheat was hers to live with. Second, hire an experienced family law attorney who is reasonable. The person who helped me was crucial in reaching a resolution without crazy fees. Third, lean on friends and family for support as much as possible. Fourth, prioritize regular exercise to maintain mental health. I started hitting the weights a month after D-Day and am starting to see the benefits. The confidence gained has been helpful to get through the process. Fifth, engage in individual counseling and talk with someone. This has been tremendously helpful. Sixth, realize that the cheater's decisions are their own. No matter the excuses, it's on them. I heard it all from my soon-to-be ex, but I now know our marriage went wrong after she invited someone into her life who fed her lines, stroked her ego, and gave her extra attention. She had to make me the bad guy to justify her actions in her mind. While stress may have played a role, not communicating with her husband and confiding in a 2-time divorced cheater with no moral compass is entirely her responsibility and a recipe for disaster. The final chapter of this saga is yet to be written, but poor choices carry consequences. That's all I'll say on the matter. Update. I'm not too far from moving into my own place because of my kids with my soon-to-be ex and legal reasons. I've stayed in our marital house during this process, and I've shared updates in a couple of other threads. Thankfully, the end of the tunnel is near for me. Even though I'll have to co-parent with my cheating ex, I've made it clear that she ended our marriage and any chance of friendship. I don't have room in my life for a dishonest cheater. Despite her insistence on being there for me and helping with my new house, I've firmly stated that she ruined our relationship, and I'm simply giving her what she wanted, to replace me. I've even told her she won't be welcome in my house. Has anyone else dealt with an ex wanting to stick around? I guess it's some sort of appearance thing, trying to make the split seem less bad if we're friends. So far, her fair partner hasn't shown up, and she tries to hide it. But I know it's only a matter of time before their supposed deep emotional connection takes them elsewhere. I have no desire to be in the same room with them, but I'll watch from a safe distance when it all falls apart. Today, the official decree came, and I'm no longer married. I got the keys to my new house and will start moving soon. I chose a buyout to start fresh and got lucky finding a well-kept house a minute from my current home. It has a huge backyard, wood fire pit, big garage, and a prime location. I back up to a nature preserve, perfect for my outdoor hobbies. It's my own little paradise. Some may wonder why I chose to stay so close. Well, I want to be near my kids so they know their dad is close when they need me. Following the community's advice, I focused on what's important, started working out, and embraced a new career opportunity that's paying off. I haven't bothered with online dating or looking for a new partner and plan to enjoy the single life for a while. My focus is on my 2 kids and personal growth. As for my ex and her affair partner, I'm starting to let go of that disaster. Whatever happens is no longer my concern. As someone wisely said, when someone gets with a cheater, they're getting someone who cheated. I did my best as a husband and father, and it's time for someone else to appreciate it. Update. That said, in my new free time, unfortunately, I've reflected and seen the life I had planned disappear. I wonder, how could this happen so quickly? I'm sure everyone has had time to ponder the who, what, where, when, why. But when I look back, my spouse and I had a great life ahead. Our careers were doing well after some initial major efforts to establish ourselves. We had a paid-off home, 2 beautiful kids out of diapers, and college funds for them, among many other things going for us. Thinking about this is my final challenge to overcome, but I can't grasp the mindset of someone who had so much but decided to destroy it all and go all in on unreliable serial cheating. Do I need to mention OMB one more time to this group? I know I'll struggle for a while to heal from all this, but when I look at our history and lives together, I just wonder how a person can be so selfish and stupid. I understand desire can't be negotiated and all that jazz, but the whole point of being married is to work together as a team and continuously fall back in love with each other. Update. Wanted to give a quick update, especially for those folks who just went through their D-Day and are worried about what life may be like. It's been 6 weeks post-decree and I moved into my new place a month ago. I've been working like crazy to set it up as my sanctuary, and now it's well furnished and feels like home. My home. My kids have visited many times, and the rotation is working well. People say kids are resilient, and now that I've seen it firsthand, it's reassuring. I'm happy to report that they're handling things pretty well. We have our own fun at Dad's house, and they've told me many times they love being over. As for me, it was initially weird having newfound freedom, but making to-do lists and setting daily, weekly, and long-term goals is helping a lot. I was initially sad, but keeping busy keeps those feelings away. Right now, I'm solely focused on self-improvement. While I've thought about putting myself back on the scene, truthfully I have no interest, so I'm keeping my focus on home improvement, fitness, and my kids. Regarding the cheating ex, I keep it cordial, and that's it. No sign of the supposed deep emotional connection affair partner yet. What the heck? But who cares? Tonight, I sat outside, had a few beers and a cigar, and enjoyed the peace and tranquility of my property. I thought about getting away from the situation my ex put me in, and it feels like the right thing to do for those at the beginning and doubting leaving. I get it. It's the toughest thing, and heartbreak is a kick in the junk. But deciding to eject a cheater was the only right decision, and I believe with time, it will get better. Update. Now into the 2nd month of being on my own, and my house is coming together nicely. My kids are doing well, making memories, and I have some fun trips planned. Following the usual advice, I've stepped up my weight training and dieting, upgraded my home gym, and regularly hit the heavy bag. It seems to be working. In my monthly therapy sessions, my counselor noticed positive changes in my weight distribution and mentioned great progress mentally and physically. A little affirmation that things are heading in the right direction. I haven't bothered with dating. At this point, it's early, and I'm enjoying my free time, new projects, and spending time with friends. So, to the main point of the post, and I'm sure everyone wonders, has bad luck struck bad people? I don't have the satisfying post detailing the downfall of OMB or the ex-wife just yet. However, it's radio silence as the supposed greatest romance ever hasn't been revealed, and OMB remains a secret. I wonder why this could be. Is my ex-wife managing her image and waiting for a better time to reveal everything? But isn't the thrill of the affair gone now that they can't sneak around? I'm no longer around, so I find it odd. I suspect they are still communicating. She makes it obvious by hiding her phone when I'm present during kids' activities. But why? You wanted this, sneaked around, claimed it was amazing. Why not broadcast it now that the horrible ex-husband is gone? Has this happened to anyone else with their ex and affair partner? Update. I'm nearing the 6-month mark post-divorce and almost a year past D-Day. I hope to keep offering assistance in any small way to those in need. I deeply appreciate the support I've received and would love to return the favor. On that note, 6 months post-D-Day, there's a lot of positive news. My house feels like a home, my kids are comfortable and enjoy coming over, and they've made some neighborhood friends. I'm extremely thankful that the little ones have handled this process so well, understanding the balance between dad time and mom time without any complaints or tears while they're here. I've immersed myself in numerous home improvements. The house I moved into had some neglect from the previous owner, but I see it as an opportunity to make it my own. Additionally, I've set up a home gym with everything I need, managing to work out and box 4 times a week, bringing my body back to where it needs to be. Throughout this ordeal, I also underwent a significant internal career change at my workplace and surprisingly received praise instead of making any mistakes. I've kept my situation private, received a raise, and gained exposure to move my career upward. Although I still struggle daily with mental health and focus, I manage it with therapy and workouts, and things are improving. I think of my ex-wife less each day, and each small step forward brings relief. As for her, she's still in La La Land, but we co-parent decently. I firmly keep our conversations strictly about the kids and maintain a cordial relationship. Anyone following my story might wonder about the saga of OMB. All I can say is the world's greatest love story hasn't gone public. But my kids recently informed me he's been around in a small capacity. It's amusing to me that 6 months post D-Day, they're still sneaking around. These are surely the great hallmarks of a long-lasting, trusting relationship, guaranteed to stand the test of time. I've accepted that whatever will happen. At this point, I feel fortunate to be away from a person willing to lie to their most trusted partner without remorse. I have a solid chance at building an even better life than before. Good riddance and good luck. Anyways, that is all. Update. Just wanted to share a great conversation I had with my buddy last night over a few beers. It's amazing how Friday night discussions can sometimes solve the world's problems. For context, my buddy went through a divorce 7 years ago, and his situation is surprisingly similar to mine. Even our exes share the same birthday. As I've mentioned in recent posts, the grand reveal of OMB and my ex is slowly unfolding. While I maintain low contact with my ex, my kids make comments, and it's hard not to feel bothered. Anyway, my buddy noticed my frustration and shared something that really helped. Dude, think about their lives. 2 cheaters getting together, and consider how lousy and low value that guy is for manipulating a married woman with kids. Now look at it this way. They have to make it work no matter how bad it gets. You or I can meet new people, and if it doesn't work out, we move on without any problem or worry. They're stuck. He has to be in your old house knowing you built that, dealing with your kids and inheriting your selfish ex and in-laws. But they're stuck, or else they look stupid. Can you imagine that kind of hell? But you're free. I pondered on that, and this morning it really helped me gain perspective. What a dreadful future they have to look forward to. Just wanted to share this thought and ask if others have reached a similar conclusion or witnessed it in action. Thanks, as always, to you awesome people. Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Trying to play house in a home that the affair partner never built, a home that he helped to destroy. Update. A friend is invited to my kid's birthday. For those who remember my story, I've got something to share, but right now, I need some advice. Here's the background. My daughter's birthday is this weekend. I already had a small celebration last weekend with my family. Nothing extravagant, just some presents and cake, and my daughter loved it. Now, the ex-wife is throwing her usual look how great I am party this weekend. I did receive an invite, but I just found out the other day that the affair partner, OMB, will be there. I called out my ex-wife, telling her it was a pretty lousy move, but she didn't respond. To make things worse, the ex-wife's co-workers, family, friends who knew about the affair will also be there. And the party is at my old house, enemy territory. This is terrible overall, especially since it's my daughter's party after our divorce. I can't shake the feeling that it's a setup. It's a lose-lose situation, and after talking to some supportive members here, it feels like stepping into a pit of vipers. The only idea I have is to go in well-dressed, with a fresh haircut, and showcase my new physique. I've been putting in the work and staying positive, but either way, I just don't like this. It feels super manipulative on the part of the ex-wife. She knows exactly how she's playing this and wants me to react in a petty way. Any advice is appreciated. Update. Regarding the exciting update, this one's a good story. Initially, I told my ex-wife that I would be joining the party. What I didn't do was inform her that I'd changed my mind. I waited until Saturday morning to swing by the house and drop off my daughter's card and gift. Unbeknownst to me, the kids were at Grandma and Grandpa's house for the morning. As I drove into the driveway in my sports car, OMB's car was on the side of the road. I quietly strolled into the backyard, surprising both the ex-wife and OMB as they were setting up decorations. The look of utter terror was on both their faces. When I saw them, I didn't feel anger, just a sense of how sad they both are. Good luck together. Is that growth? I kept my composure and said, I'm here to give my daughter her present, but I won't be joining. The ex-wife was shocked, and she practically pleaded for me to join, but I declined politely. I went to your parents' place to give my daughter her gift and parted ways. I even gave a, hey, see you later, bro, to OMB before leaving with my head held high. Not more than 3 minutes later, I got a call from the ex-wife pleading for me to come to the party, but I held my ground and politely refused. Shortly after, I dropped off the gift, spent a few minutes at the ex-in-laws, played with my kids, and said my goodbyes, all very kindly without mentioning the situation. As for me, I kept busy taking care of my house, had a good workout, much needed after a break, and went on a date. It was somewhat of a bust, but she was nice, and at least it was a distraction. My daughter called me today, thanked me for the gift, but didn't ask why I wasn't there. As everyone said, she was so busy she didn't pay attention. There it is. I know if I had gone, it would have set me back for nothing. Instead, she told everyone I'd be there, and with me, a no-show and OMB present, people will likely figure out why. Now I can enjoy my weekend without feeling mentally exhausted and do some fun things. Update. I'm still grinning about the little maneuver I pulled last week. Things have been going well for me since then. Anyway, here's a bit of humor for you. Some background since D-Day. As those who have followed my story might recall, my in-laws distanced themselves from me. I understand it. Family comes first. However, one member of my extended family has reached out, and we regularly spend time together. He's genuinely a person of character. I received a text on Saturday during the party. Hey man, let's grab some beers this week. Your presence is missed here. Fast forward to the other day when we met up, started having beers, and got to the point. He began talking about how awkward the party was with people clearly uncomfortable about the situation. Surprisingly, OMB wasn't introduced to anyone. The ex-wife deliberately kept him apart during the party, directing him on what to do. The in-laws didn't bother talking to him and seemed pretty annoyed, sitting by themselves. He looked like a fish out of water, spending most of the time indoors and avoiding almost everyone. There were also quiet comments among some of the in-laws, aunts, and uncles, saying that the party was lacking in class. I swear I'm moving toward indifference, but I couldn't help but laugh. My absence was well understood, and the fact that I had given an earlier gift to my daughter was known, so it seems like the family had a full understanding of why I wasn't there. Mission accomplished. Anyway, that's my Friday humor.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I'm 35, and my wife is 31. We haven't been intimate in 6 months, and I'm unsure how to handle the situation. We have 2 young boys, one who is 3 years old and the other who is 1.5, and we're currently in the process of building a house. I'm not the type to let problems fester. I prefer to address issues quickly. So, I started a conversation with my wife to understand what was happening. I asked her why she had stopped talking to me, hugging me, and kissing me. I also wanted to know why she seemed to mind my touch. At first, she was reluctant to discuss it, but eventually, she opened up. What I learned was quite shocking. She feels I'm not enough for her and that she's handling everything on her own. She feels like she has to make all the decisions and take care of the kids by herself, and she even mentioned that I'd be better off alone. While I'm an introvert, I'm not an extreme one. I accepted what she said and expressed that I understood her feelings. I assured her that I would work on my behavior to reduce her stress. I love her deeply and prefer to keep the peace rather than argue. However, I do have my own thoughts that keep me up at night. I feel there are significant discrepancies in her claims about me, as I believe I'm fulfilling the role of a good husband. I work around 8 to 9 hours a day, and afterward, I take care of the boys, playing with them, feeding them, taking the older one to the pool, and putting them to bed. I also wake up in the middle of the night when needed. Besides caring for the kids, I help manage the household as well. I handle the dishes, grocery shopping, and do some cleaning around the house, although she prefers to clean herself because she thinks I'm not very efficient at it. I take care of car maintenance, manage things related to the new house, and do a lot to make her life easier. I understand that it's tough with two little boys. However, I'm not a naturally proactive person. There are those who can't sit on the couch for 5 minutes without thinking about what to fix or what business to start. Her father is like that, but I'm not. Once the day is over, the kids are asleep, and everything is done. I prefer to relax by watching a movie or playing video games to unwind. I'm not one to start my own business. I excel in my field but prefer being given direction and doing my job well. I don't aspire to have a spectacular career or millions in the bank. I just want a happy, healthy family and to earn a decent living. I've come to realize that she has started to have an issue with my approach, despite us being happily married for 4 years and together for 5 years before that. Our conversation in December prompted me to start working against my natural tendencies, making an effort to be more proactive, like doing extra grocery shopping and tackling household repairs instead of taking time to relax in the evenings. While she appreciated these changes, it didn't alter her feelings towards me. I felt the need to initiate a second conversation about our marriage. When I asked her if she wanted to save it, she responded, "I don't know." It was hard to hear, but I felt I had to ask her if she was open to marriage counseling. She replied, "I don't know," and I emphasized that it wasn't a time for uncertainty, especially with our kids potentially facing the reality of having separated parents. After that, she agreed. So I took the initiative to find a therapist. During our talk, she revealed some painful truths. She married me to impress her parents and her married sisters, aiming for the image of a big happy family with beautiful children. She admitted that she felt enchanted by me at the time, but wasn't truly in love. I also discovered that she had met with her priest to discuss our marriage, which was tough to digest. I found a good therapist, and we're now about to have our third session. We learned that we have different love languages. I need physical touch, while she prefers acts of service. However, despite starting counseling, she hasn't been giving me any physical affection. After the second session, I asked her how she felt about the process, and all she expressed was discomfort with having to share our personal lives with a stranger. When the therapist learned that we haven't been sleeping in the same room for 6 months, she was shocked. My wife explained that she was co-sleeping with the kids, and there simply wasn't room for me. The therapist pointed out that it sets a poor example for the kids not to allow their father into the bedroom, suggesting that if there's no space on the bed, we could go to IKEA and get a single bed to place next to the big one. I did just that. I bought the bed, put it together, and now I'm sleeping there. The funny thing is, I still feel alone. My wife is far to the left, the boys are in the middle, and I'm on the far right. Since this issue began, my wife has changed her narrative a bit. She now claims she's been feeling depressed from being home with the kids all the time, and says that she said those hurtful things because she was too emotional. I would never say anything like that to her, but I feel like I have to believe her. Recently, she went back to work, and we hired a nanny. The only change in her behavior is that we've started talking again, but I'm not just her friend. I'm her husband, and there's still no intimacy. It doesn't look like things are going to improve. There are no signs of it. She seems indifferent about our upcoming marriage counseling sessions. I find myself having to schedule them, and when I mention them, she insists she doesn't need it at all, doing it only because I wanted to. I've started to feel like an abuser. She's never been overly enthusiastic about intimacy. We used to have it once a week, which was fine for me. Could have been more often, but it was okay. This year, we've only had sex twice, and both times felt like pity sex. One time was at the beginning of January for my birthday, and now it seems I have to have a special occasion just to get laid. The other time was after a counseling session, but she just lay there, covering her chest and waiting for me to finish. That experience made me lose interest altogether. It's not just about the lack of intimacy. Whenever I bring up the topic, my wife simply responds, "That's who I am. If you don't like it, just leave me." I feel lost and unsure about what to do. There was one troubling incident when my wife tried to call her ex-boyfriend 4 times in a row at 10 p.m. I knew about it because we used to have an app that showed incoming and outgoing calls for both our numbers. After that, I felt frantic. Why was she calling her ex at such a late hour? I decided to check her messages on her laptop, which felt terrible, but I felt justified given the situation. When I confronted her about the calls, she initially lied and said she hadn't called him, but when I showed her the app with the outgoing calls, she had no choice but to admit it. I asked her why she was trying to reach him, and she explained that she was just calling back because he had previously called her. When I asked her if she had messaged him, she said no, but I then showed her the message she sent, where she stated she was going to keep calling until he picked up and talked to her like a normal person. She claimed he had gotten drunk and called her, saying some nonsense, and when she heard that, she told him to F off and hung up. She felt guilty about the calls and attempted to reach him multiple times when he didn't pick up. Eventually, She sent a message, but he didn't reply. I'm at a loss about how to interpret this. It happened around the time she started distancing herself from me. In her mind, there's nothing strange or wrong about keeping this from me. To her, it's not important. For me, any contact with an ex is a huge red flag, and I can't accept it. I can't help but wonder if she's cheating. We haven't had intimacy in 6 months, which coincides with when the calls took place. It seemed like something out of a movie, something I never thought my wife would do. However, today my perspective changed drastically. I feel foolish for being just another statistic, but I guess that's how life is sometimes. I know I promised to confront her ex and speak to her family, but I decided to take a step back and remain calm. Can you believe how simple it was? I installed a voice-activated recorder in our car, nothing too elaborate. It only took 3 days for her to use the car for work and then go to a workout. During that time, she had a video conversation with him. I don't know who initiated the call, but I heard every word. They spoke about personal things, intimacy, and their lives, joking and laughing like we used to when we first met 9 years ago. There was a chemistry between them that I haven't experienced with her in a long time. She even talked about planning a vacation to visit him this July and gave him a 2-year time frame to move back to our country. I can't believe what I heard. After listening to an hour of this recording, I have a lot to process. I need to meet with an attorney next week. I just wanted to express my gratitude. You opened my eyes. If it weren't for you, I would never have bought that voice recording device, and I initially felt guilty about placing it in the car. I can't believe it. Right now, I need to take a step back and process everything while thinking about my kids and what she's done. They started their affair in September of last year, and it took me 2 months to notice the changes in her behavior. I'll be taking care of my elderly father for the entire next week in another city, which means she won't be going to work. Instead, she'll be using my home office. This likely means she'll be talking to him in there. Should I place the recorder in the office for the week, or do I already have enough evidence? As for the updates, it's clear that I've been out of the picture for a long time. She doesn't want to spend any time with me in our rented apartment. She's always busy with other things, going to her parents, friends, etc. She even goes to sleep or just lies down in bed after we put the kids to sleep, 1 and 3 years old. The recordings reveal everything. She talks about how she loves him, her desire to visit him, and their intimate life together. They discuss his interests, and she has said she wants to go on vacation with him. She even mentioned that she plans to become his wife and leave me soon, along with discussing his favorite intimate positions. So yes, it's clear they've been intimate. It's all there. The thing is, she has no idea that I know everything. Her family and friends are unaware of the situation. They just think we're experiencing a temporary crisis. She's one of 3 sisters and is Catholic, attending church every Sunday. We live in a small town with a population of around 20,000, and we recently built a house, although it's still not finished. I have a strong feeling she will file for divorce soon. It's evident she is struggling to cope with living together in the apartment. Her body language and complete lack of conversation make it clear. She seems to want me out so that once I'm gone, her affair partner, AP, can move back to this town within 2 years and live with her in our house, along with our 2 young boys. In one of the recordings, she mentioned giving him 2 years to return to our country. People will likely accept that she needs a father figure for her children and won't question her decisions. The AP is her first boyfriend, and they were together for 7 years before she married me. We have been together for 9 years. The AP lives abroad but visits our country frequently. I refuse to be played like this. I now have an attorney and will be meeting with him soon to discuss my situation. I also have enough evidence that could potentially damage her reputation if I chose to share parts of the recording. I'm seeking advice on what to do when she serves me divorce papers. My attorney mentioned that my documents will take a month to prepare. I never imagined I would have to deal with someone like her. I met with my attorney and learned some important information. It turns out that trying to completely undermine her world wouldn't be wise, primarily because we have kids and will need to co-parent for the next 15 to 16 years. Additionally, I have a lot of respect for her family and don't want to involve them as witnesses in the divorce. Realistically, I wouldn't win custody of the kids, as they are small and need to be with their mother, who lives an hour away in the capital city. This means I would likely be an every other weekend dad. Moreover, I wouldn't have the authority to sell our house since the kids require stable living conditions, and they currently live in a property owned by her father, which is only temporary. As frustrating as it is, that's the reality here in Poland. After our conversation, the attorney sent her the divorce papers, which were scheduled to be delivered right after Easter. In Poland, this holiday lasts for 2 days, Sunday and Monday. I managed to maintain the facade during this time, using alcohol to help. On Tuesday, I I took a day off work to care for our 1-year-old son while she went to work in the capital. Meanwhile, my brother assisted me in moving my belongings from the apartment into his car. The postman delivered the divorce papers, which actually served as an invitation to mediation to settle things amicably. The papers state that she is in a relationship with her affair partner, AP, and that this is the reason for the divorce. The evidence I have will serve as leverage when discussing child support and other matters. When she came home, I confronted her, stating that I knew everything and had irrefutable proof. I expressed how deeply hurt I was and told her she needed to contact my lawyer. I then handed her the divorce papers and left to visit her parents. Of course, she started questioning me about what I knew and how I found out, denying everything. However, her parents were shocked but believed me. I recorded the entire conversation as my attorney advised. I began by asking if they thought I was a good, caring husband and father, to which they agreed. This way, she can't use them as witnesses against me in court. They understood the gravity of her actions and recognized how she had destroyed our lives and those of our children. I thanked them for their understanding and then went to the capital city. I called a friend to help spread the news to her friends. Just 2 hours later, my brother-in-law called to inform me that she had admitted to cheating on me with the AP, although she didn't acknowledge that they had actually been intimate. He informed me that everyone is on my side and that she has destroyed our family. He mentioned that her sister visited my soon-to-be ex-wife and told her how evil her actions are. However, he also noted that there is a possibility of saving the situation, sharing that he himself cheated on his wife, who forgave him, and now they are very happy together. Then, her father called me and acknowledged that it was entirely her fault, expressing that she doesn't fully grasp the extent of her actions. He stated that the affair partner, AP, will never be allowed in his house and that he would stop providing financial support to my soon-to-be ex-wife. He even attempted to call the AP but didn't get an answer. In the end, he mentioned that he believes the marriage can be salvaged. Finally, her other sister texted me, offering her full support but also expressing a belief that the situation could still be repaired. This worries me because I genuinely don't think it can be saved. I'm confident about that. I'm concerned that they might cling to the notion that I lack a definitive piece of evidence, like a tape of them together, which could undermine my reasons for leaving her. I do have recordings of her making comments like, "Make sure you last more than 3 seconds when I come to visit you in Holland," and "I wonder if your dad's stuff is the same as yours." You know what? I'll ask that woman how long your brother's stuff is, and I'll tell her how long yours is. She expressed her feelings by saying, "I love you. I'm going to leave my husband." She even asked me to record myself and send her a video discussing her favorite position, which she referred to as crappy style with the back straight. She was essentially showing me how her life with him would look and stated, "I'm giving you 2 years to move back here." Furthermore, right after our confrontation, she told me that she never stopped loving him. To me, that's proof enough of her feelings. Right now, as many of you mentioned, she is starting to crawl back after her family confronted her about the situation. She's been sending me texts saying things like, "I didn't know what I was doing. I can't imagine living without you. I'm so sorry for everything I've done. I'm waiting with the kids for your return." She even claimed that she didn't mean to say she always loved him. I can't shake the feeling that they're trying to make me think I rushed into divorce because I don't have the actual tape of them together. They don't know the full extent of my proof, and she isn't admitting to having had sex with him. It's believable since he's in Holland, but he could have easily visited her here. When she was served, I thought that she would likely start crawling back to save face with her family and to get me back because she needs help with our 2 little boys. That's exactly what's happening. She began messaging me on Messenger, but not too frequently. The messages are all quite similar, expressing, "I can't imagine my life without you. I love you and only you." She sent some photos of our kids, along with messages like, "We're waiting for you and love you very much." However, it's been 5 weeks, and she hasn't called or visited me once. She's had plenty of opportunities to stop by, literally driving past my parents' house, where I'm currently staying. Instead, I've only received intermittent messages from her. We've seen each other a few times while exchanging the kids, but she hasn't attempted to apologize or have a meaningful conversation. It's just been a quick hi and bye. On the other hand, her family has started to communicate with me much more frequently. Her father called me twice, and her mother sent me a dozen texts with links to Christian pages discussing forgiveness. One of her sisters reached out, apologizing and suggesting that my wife has been possessed by some evil spirit. Meanwhile, the other sister acknowledged how my wife ruined our family and indicated she doesn't expect me to return to her. My brother-in-law even came over to take me out for a beer. He wasn't trying to persuade me, It felt more like a conversation about what happened and what the future might look like if I don't come back. He'd like me to return, but he wasn't pushing for it. Overall, all of these discussions conveyed a sense of disbelief at my wife's actions. They expressed a desire for me to return to her, but also conveyed understanding if I chose not to. However, the day came when I made my decision, and my lawyer informed her lawyer that I couldn't forgive her and wanted a divorce. My lawyer presented my terms, and now we're waiting for her lawyer's response. While I waited for their answer, her sister began blaming me, insisting that I would destroy the marriage. She was very clear that it was my wife who initiated this by being selfish, but now, she claims my wife is very sorry, crying, and wishing she could turn back time. Suddenly, it's me who's being labeled as selfish for wanting a divorce. Her sister argued that I could cancel the divorce and just come back to raise our 2 boys, without needing to reconcile with my wife. She told me how full of anger I was and warned that it would only grow over time. Her sister insisted I should simply suck it up and continue living with my wife, framing this divorce as a form of revenge on her, while also claiming it would hurt our children. I knew from others that this shift would happen, but it's still shocking to experience it firsthand. I confronted my sister-in-law, and the tension in the room was palpable. "Look," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm, "if you truly want to make things right, I'll forgive your sister. If you sleep with me for the next whole week, I also need to know if your husband will welcome you back to his bed after I am done with you." Her eyes widened in shock, but before she could respond, her husband jumped in. "I don't condone what this woman has done," he said coldly. "If my wife ever treated me like that, I wouldn't think twice about throwing her out on the streets." He looked at his wife and told her, "Have your thoughts straight, woman? No man would take a 304 back. You may call it liberating, but remember actions have consequences. Now that I have seen your thoughts, you better fall in line, or you will be one for the streets. I give you my word for it." Her sister had no other option than to hold her tongue. Today, I felt guilty, questioning whether it was my fault that my wife treated me poorly for over half a year, emotionally and physically abandoning me. It's tough to grapple with the narrative that I'm the one who is abandoning our kids. They're really swaying me hard, but I remain firm. The divorce will happen. It seems like they're painting me as the bad guy. I'm struggling to come up with a way to silence her family's criticisms about me abandoning our kids. In Poland, it's often expected for small children, like ours, to remain close to their mother in the event of a divorce. It's been 2 months since that fateful day when I confronted her, handed her the divorce papers, and moved to the capital city, an hour away from the small town where we once lived together. Right now, I'm crashing on my parents' couch, and it's far from ideal. Their living room has turned into a makeshift workspace and entertainment area, with my clothes draped over every available chair. I'm working from home for 8 hours a day, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. After work, I help my elderly parents, who are 88 and 71, with daily chores, do the groceries, and drive them to doctor appointments. It's a lot, but I find solace in keeping busy. I also hit the gym or catch a movie whenever I can to escape the whirlwind of negative thoughts swirling in my mind about everything that has transpired. I get to see my kids every weekend. Their mother drops them off, and I drive them back to her at the end of the weekend. Those moments with my boys are the highlight of my week. I genuinely feel happy when they're around, and it brings me some peace amidst the chaos. I took a paternity test just to clear up any doubts. Thankfully, there's no confusion. They're definitely my sons. But the situation with the divorce terms is still murky. Living with my parents as a father of 2 is not exactly where I envision myself at this stage in life. I'm fighting for a significant amount of money from my soon-to-be ex-wife, and she's going to take over the mortgage for the house. She agreed to take over the mortgage, but only offered me 1/3 of the money I'm asking for. Her reasoning was that this was the amount I had contributed to building the house. It's frustrating because I didn't cause this situation. I'm not guilty of any of it. 1/3 isn't going to help me find a place to live, especially since I need a decent flat. So, the conversations between our attorneys continue, but I feel stuck. The real kicker is that she wants to keep the house. However, during our last discussion, I learned she might be forced to sell it. Honestly, she should have considered this from the beginning. There's no way she can manage paying the mortgage and giving me the money I need. It'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds. We also have to negotiate other financial matters, like child support. She's asking for way too much, and it's becoming a sticking point. To make matters worse, she insists that I should be the one to pick up the kids from the small town and drive them back to her at the end of the weekend. That's a lot of fuel and time on my end, especially when she should be the one dropping them off. Last Sunday, her sister invited me to her daughter's communion. I decided to go so I could spend more time with my boys. Every family member knows my decision is final, so nobody tried to persuade me otherwise. I just focused on taking care of my boys while everyone else drank and ate at the table after the ceremony. However, at one point, my wife asked me if my decision was truly final. I looked at her and calmly told her that yes, it was final, and nothing was going to change that. I was there for my boys, to spend as much time with them as I could. Then she started saying how remorseful she was and how much she regretted what she had done. She claimed she had ended the relationship with the other guy and even went to an exorcist, telling him every detail of the affair, leaving it in God's hands. I replied that I didn't care about her priest and that if anyone deserved to hear the truth, it was me. Honestly, at that moment, it was just laughable. I decided to give her one chance to tell me everything. I asked her how many times she had been intimate with him. She replied that she hadn't. So, I pressed on, reminding her about the party with her friends from work back in November. I asked why she had rented an Airbnb for the night instead of just sleeping at one of her friends' places. Hearing that seemed to hit her hard. She went numb and struggled to find words, finally asking, "Why do you need to keep torturing yourself with this?" It was infuriating. I wasn't trying to torture myself. I just wanted the truth. But it felt like she was more concerned about her own discomfort than taking responsibility for her actions. I explained to her that if she was truly remorseful, she wouldn't continue to lie 2 months after I left. That was just one example. I told her that to me, having sex over video chat was the same thing, and I knew she had done it with him. She couldn't even count how many times she'd been intimate with the other guy. Then I asked her how she imagined us getting back together when she could start a conversation with me and lie the next second. I pointed out that I would be checking her phone every day, and I could see the discomfort on her face. She replied that wouldn't be trust. It would just be treating me like garbage. But our son interrupted us before I could respond. As the conversation wound down, I finished with, "Remember, you didn't just cheat on me. You cheated on our 2 little wonderful boys too." That hit her hard. She started yelling that this would be the last time I said something like that in front of our kids. It's funny because her sister had told me how my wife was suffering and crying every day because of all this. It just made me realize how two-faced she really was. Crying in front of the family and yet still lying to me. She even had the audacity to tell me that if she wanted to, she could be with the other guy, and her family couldn't do anything about it. As if I should be thankful that she ended it with him, and that she was now in control of not being with him. It felt like she was trying to put a positive spin on her actions, as if her choices were some kind of gift to me. I can't shake the feeling that this situation isn't going to end well for my boys. My older son has been acting nervous lately, and I can see the toll this is taking on them both. It breaks my heart, but I'll always be there for them, no matter what. Our attorneys finally came to an agreement, and the divorce will happen shortly. She's taking the unfinished house, and the mortgage is exclusively hers now. I want the house to be for the kids. I don't want anyone saying that I caused its sale as part of my revenge. I also can't bear the thought of living in her small hometown, an hour away from the capital city where I am now. I'll be taking back what I put into the house, which isn't a bad amount at all. The child support amount we agreed on is reasonable too. Plus, we settled that she will drop the kids off at my place in the capital city every other weekend. I just have to drive them back afterward. Even though I see my kids almost every weekend, it's still not enough for me. The pain of being apart from them is sometimes overwhelming. I can't stand the thought of my 1- and 3-year-old boys living without a father just because their mother can't behave. I wish I could have them full-time, but unfortunately, that's not how the law works in Poland. I'm considering starting to drive there in the middle of the week or something to make it work. I need to find a way to be more present in their lives and support them through this difficult time. As for her, she keeps messaging me, pouring out her heart. She says she loves me, wishes she could turn back time, and that she suffers every day because of her actions. It's astonishing to see how much she has softened. She even told me she no longer thinks checking her phone would be treating her like garbage. In fact, she encouraged me to do it whenever I want, and she said we could move out of that small town to the capital city together. In a surprising turn, she agreed to tell me every detail about the affair if I would take her back. She even came to my parents' house to apologize, which felt like a significant shift. Someone must have talked to her. It's like a light bulb went off. Now, she's willing to do everything to show her remorse. Her last message hit me hard. She thanked me for not selling the house and for ending things amicably. She mentioned agreeing to my terms, which means accepting the divorce in court, but she also added, "Let me just tell you that it will not be true. I don't want this divorce and love you very much. I know you don't believe it and I understand, but I hope I will have a chance to prove my love to you one day. I love you and I'm sorry for everything." Words like that sway me, and they don't help with my healing process. Part of me wants to believe her, but another part is terrified of falling back into the same cycle of pain and betrayal. I know I have to stay strong for my boys, but it's hard when she seems genuinely remorseful. It creates a whirlwind of emotions that makes it difficult to focus on what I need to do moving forward. I would be lying if I told you her words don't affect me. The vision of my boys growing up in the capital city instead of that small town is tempting. I genuinely believe she's struggling alone with two small boys. But at the end of the day, she did what she did. She cheated and ruined it all. I thought time would help, but the wound heals very slowly. I know I need to stay the course and end this for good. I'll update one day, maybe when I finally find happiness again. But I can't help but question her sincerity. Is she truly remorseful? She only agreed to tell me the details of her infidelity if I consider coming back. Why not right away? It took 3 months for her to show any sign of remorse. And when she apologizes, she does it over Messenger instead of calling or coming to see me. It feels distant and insincere. To make matters worse, her family has turned against me. Her mother has called me a narcissist, and her sister accuses me of wanting to profit from the divorce while leaving a woman with 2 little boys. Their support for her is disheartening, making me feel even more isolated in this situation. Yesterday, I visited my kids for a brief time, and she offered that I could stay the night. I left, of course. I would appreciate some insight into my situation. D-Day was April 7th, and after almost half a year, my mindset has become clearer, though complex situations require me to answer the same questions every day. The questions I grapple with are, do I still love her? Could I go back to her just for the kids? Do I want to return to the small town where she lives and finish building the house? Would I feel comfortable with myself in 5 to 10 years, knowing what she's done? The answer to all these questions is a definite no, without any hesitation. Yes, I love my kids immensely and would want to see them every day, but I can't. I want to love her, but I can't, despite her wanting me back. I would love to have that family back, but I can't. I wish I could forget about everything, but I can't. At one point, I even offered her a second chance. I suggested she move to my city with the kids so we could start anew. But she didn't even agree, telling me she has her family's help in the small town and won't sell the house because she wants our kids to have something in the future. It feels like she's prioritizing her comfort over what could be a fresh start for all of us. When I told her that a family is not just a building but a mother, father, and kids, she fell silent. In that moment, I realized there is no us anymore. There's a mutual agreement that we've reached a deadlock. No middle ground exists between us. I explained that I will not continue my life in that small town because that's where the affair began. He noticed her on the street, drove by, and called her. I emphasized that I absolutely refused to finish building a house located just a mile away from her affair partner's family home. I can't live another day worrying that she might run into him. He lives abroad but visits family 2 to 3 times a year. That's just too much uncertainty for me. Our conversation ended there. I hate that small town, and she doesn't want to move to the capital. It feels like we're stuck in this cycle of unwillingness to compromise. As for the house, we agreed that I would take back the money I put into it, and she would keep the building for the kids. While it's a practical solution, it's also a stark reminder of what's been lost. The house symbolizes everything that's gone wrong in our relationship, and even if it could have been a home for our family, I refuse to let it hold me hostage to the past. She's now expressing concerns about one part of our agreement, which states she cannot sell the house until the kids turn 18. If she sells it before then, she'll have to split the proceeds with me. She argues this is unfair because she plans to finish the house with her own money, and if she sells it, I would receive half of a potentially much more valuable completed home. When I asked her why she would even consider selling it, she said she can't predict what her future will look like. At this point, I can't trust her, and I'm leaning towards just selling the building. I struggle with the idea of selling the house that was meant for our kids. Today, she sent me a message asking for my answer to a question. I want to ask you this here because if we talk in person, we'll just end up shouting at each other. You've told me how you feel about me and my actions, and I don't want to revisit those discussions. So, I'm asking, do you want to forgive me and move past what happened to rebuild our family? Or have you already decided that you can't forgive me and won't ever return to our relationship? Please think it over and let me know your decision. I believe she isn't in a position to demand that I be specific about my feelings right now. I suspect there might be someone else involved, and she wants to clarify things with me. I responded that I'm worth more than just a conversation over messages and that we need to talk in person soon. During our conversation, I laid out my 2 conditions for our marriage to continue: moving to the capital city and cutting all ties with her affair partner and his family. She understands the second condition, But the first is a major obstacle she isn't willing to overcome. She expresses remorse for her actions but isn't open to relocating to Warsaw because she believes we won't find a beautiful home there. Even small apartments are quite expensive to rent. She argues that our kids have a comfortable life in the small town, where she only pays for the flat because it belongs to her father. If we moved, she would have to pay 4 to 5 times more for a smaller apartment, in addition to all the bills. Plus, she has her family and friends nearby to help with the kids after work. While I understand her perspective and see that the kids are happy, it feels like she's created an impossible situation for me. She mentioned that if we moved, it would only benefit me and be about feeding my ego. It's tough because she has valid points, especially since the kindergarten in the small town is owned by her sister, and we pay almost nothing for it. I stand firm in my decision not to live in the small town. While I understand that it may not make sense for her and the kids to move, we've agreed that I will continue visiting and spend as much time with them as possible. I'll take them to Warsaw every other weekend. She has assured me that she won't see anyone else and will wait for me, claiming that in the future, I'll see she remains single. I find it hard to believe, but honestly, I don't care. Perhaps it's for the best since the kids will have me as their sole father figure and not some random man. During our conversation, she said things that clearly indicated a lack of true remorse. When I asked why she hadn't called me even once during our separation, only texting me, she responded that she didn't have the time with 2 kids running around. She also stated that she would never again discuss the affair or provide me with any more details if I asked. She has drawn a line, refusing to share anything further because I told her family about some facts she didn't want me to disclose. She told me that the AP had been writing to her for many years, and she always rejected him. However, she claimed that when he reached out last year, it was my passive behavior that prompted her to start the affair. I simply replied that what she said was beyond disgusting, and she just rolled her eyes in response. She replied, "You're only thinking about yourself. You're the only one who feels sorry for yourself." I looked at her with a mix of anger and disappointment, my voice cold as I spoke. "You know what? You are the most disgusting human being I've ever met. After everything you've done, it's clear to me that no matter how many chances I give you, you'll always be the same. An immoral person who can't stay faithful. I can't keep living like this, hoping for a change that will never come. I've made my decision. I'm going ahead with the divorce. Every weekend, I make it a point to see my kids. It's the highlight of my week, those precious moments when I get to be their dad without the weight of everything else hanging over me. We have our routine. I pick them up, and we spend the day together, just enjoying each other's company. After the divorce, I had the court order my ex to drive to the capital for our visits. I wanted to make sure the kids had a stable environment, and that meant they'd come to me rather than me going back to that small town. I know it's not easy for her, but I can't concern myself with her feelings anymore. I need to prioritize what's best for my kids. As I started to rebuild my life, I decided to dip my toes back into dating. It felt good to connect with someone new, to feel that spark again after everything I had been through. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I wanted to enjoy myself and see where it might lead. When my ex found out, she wasn't happy. I could see the anger and jealousy in her eyes. It was almost amusing, really. I calmly told her, "You made your choices, and I'm allowed to make mine. I'm moving on, and you need to accept that." I wasn't going to let her dictate how I should live my life anymore. I had put up with her actions for too long, and now it was my time to find happiness again, no matter what she thought. It felt liberating to finally be in control, to move forward without looking back. A certain news came to my ears a few weeks after my divorce when I heard about my sister-in-law's recent troubles. It was hard to feel any sympathy for her. She had always been a bitch to me. It didn't surprise me at all when I found out her husband caught her kissing another man. She had been playing with fire for a while, and it seemed like she finally got burned. Her husband was rightfully furious. Can you blame him? She had betrayed him in the most humiliating way possible. The whole situation escalated quickly, and in a blind rage, he beat up the guy she was with. But the real villain here was my sister-in-law. She had orchestrated her own downfall with her reckless actions, showing her true colors. She didn't just cheat. She flaunted it, thinking she could get away with it without consequences. After the confrontation, he tossed her out along with all her belongings, and she ended up back at her parents' house. I can't say I feel bad for her. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Come out wherever you are, Kathy heard as she ran from the whispering voice in the darkness. On her way home from a party, lights and sirens flashed in the distance. As she neared, she was diverted from the main road, following the detour signs. Oh great. She sighed as her tires left the smooth paved road and her car skidded on the gravel of the detoured path. She slowed immediately, not wanting to be in the same situation as the vehicle she'd seen in the distance. The gravel road was one much less traveled on ordinary nights, but especially on Halloween. A single-lane road, wicked-looking trees diverted many motorists. The road was known as Demon Drive as it passed through several graveyards before joining the main road several miles ahead. Kathy paid attention to the road as it curved then straightened, not wanting to end up a lost soul on a deserted journey, another headstone in the already cramped cemetery. Thinking she should turn her car around before she gets to the section of the road where the tree limbs just about hug your vehicle because they are so close to the dirt shoulder, she shifts gears. But her car remains moving straight ahead, pleading, begging her car to not do this to her on such a night as this, and at this late hour, she tries it a second time. Her car backs slowly then instantly shift on its own back into drive. In a panic now, she recalled the horror stories of this road and the many lives it took over the years. The headlights of her car danced off the trunks and branches of the trees lining either side of the road. The shadows cast eerie shapes in front of her, causing her heart to beat furiously in her chest. She kept a steady speed on the gravel road, her eyes straight ahead and both hands on the wheel. A sigh of relief involuntarily escaped her lips as she saw what looked like a traffic light up ahead. Her headlights caught the reflective orange of the detour sign, and her foot instinctively pressed down on the accelerator. As she neared the intersection, the lights she thought were traffic lights were the hazard lights of another vehicle on the side of the road. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, feeling her tires get caught in a mound of sand and dirt, causing the rear end to swerve slightly. Kathy refused to stop to help the stranded motorist, or even slow down as she passed. She felt an eerie chill run down her spine as she passed, noting that the vehicle on the side of the road was an old pickup truck. She focused her eyes on the road in front of her. The chill she'd felt when she passed the truck returned, and her grip tightened even more on her steering wheel, turning her knuckles pure white. "You can run, but you can't hide," she heard the voice whisper in her ear. The voice terrified her, and to block the sounds, she turned her radio to her favorite pop station. Perspiration covered her hairline and upper lip as well as her palms. As she approached another intersection, she looked around, trying to find her way back to the main road. Looking in her rearview mirror, she saw nothing but blackness. As she drove, the low-hanging branches of the trees scraped the sides and roof of her car, adding to the fear she already felt. Just as she put her foot down on the accelerator, she heard a clunking sound on the roof of the car. She stomped harder on the accelerator and heard a scraping noise from above. When she looked in her rearview mirror, she saw nothing. She felt her heartbeat increase even more, and she wondered what had just happened. Thinking it was just a falling branch, she took a deep breath and gripped the steering wheel tightly as she continued to gaze out her rearview mirror. "Where did that truck go? Am I driving around in circles?" she said aloud to herself, noting that the trees around her looked the same as the trees she saw when she first turned onto this road. She continued to look out her side windows at her surroundings. When she turned her gaze to the road again, she slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just inches from a man clad in a flannel shirt and dirty, dingy blue jeans. He was tall and muscular, and she couldn't see his face through the shadows cast upon him from her headlights. "Can you help me, please?" the man asked after he walked to her window and tapped gently to get her attention. He had her full attention, but she was very hesitant of looking him in the eye. She didn't answer him. She just started to pull away. When she glanced in her rearview mirror, she saw the man fall to his knees, hands over his face, then outreaching to the heavens. Is he really in need of help? She wondered as she slowly drove off. If it were me, I would hope he would turn around to help. He didn't look that harmful, but again I didn't see a vehicle either. The thoughts ran through her head as she stared in her mirror. "I told you, you can't hide," the voice whispered once again, this time making her reconsider picking up that stranger in the road, if for nothing else but protection. Kathy shifted to reverse, backed the car up slowly and stopped beside the stranger. "Get in. Where are you headed?" The man didn't answer her with anything more than a smile as he situated himself in the passenger seat. He glanced out the window and Kathy thought she saw him shudder before he turned his gaze out the windshield. She put the car in drive and began to pull away slowly. "Where are you headed?" she asked again. "Anywhere away from here," the man replied, keeping his gaze fixed out the windshield. "I'm fine with that. Can you help me get back to the main road?" "Lady, you're on the main road. What are you doing out here anyway? Do you live around here?" A chill flooded through Kathy's body once more at what the man had just told her. If she was on the main road, how does she get back to where she started? "I was coming home from a Halloween party and I ran into a roadblock. I followed the detour signs and ended up here. I don't live around here. Well, you picked a hell of a night to get lost. Don't you know the stories about this stretch of road? Yes, I've heard the stories, Kathy replied quietly. Can you get me back to civilization? As long as you promise you won't scream if anything weird happens. I can't handle it when a woman screams. I can't make a promise like that, she said. I'm ready to scream now. Turn right when you get to the next intersection, the man replied. Kathy nodded in reply, glancing over at him occasionally while still concentrating on the road. He wasn't devastatingly handsome, but he wasn't unpleasant to look at either. He was just average. He had short brown hair, a nose slightly larger than average, looking as though it had been broken at least once in his life. She didn't notice the color of his eyes when she looked at him earlier, and she'd guess he stood around 6 foot tall. He had a shadow of beard stubble and a small scar on his left cheek near his nose. She blushed when he turned to look at her, and he smiled softly. My name's Ben, by the way, he said, turning his eyes back to the road. I'm Kathy, she replied quietly. Nice to meet you, Ben. You're going to come to a fork in the road up ahead. Take it to the right, Kathy. That should lead you back to the main highway. Okay, she replied, fidgeting nervously in her seat. There was an awkward silence between them, and Kathy wondered how Ben had come to be out here all alone. She wondered if that truck she saw was his, then remembered that it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Finally deciding she wanted to know more, she took a deep breath, then gathered her thoughts before she spoke. So what brings you out here? Do you live around here? She repeated his questions back to him. Ben tensed when Kathy asked her questions. How does he explain what he was doing out here? How does he tell her the terrifying things he saw? He ran his hands through his hair, sighing heavily. Ben? She asked. Yeah, he replied quietly. What are you doing out here? Do you live around here? She repeated. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Ben said quietly, still not making eye contact with her. Kathy stopped the car and slammed it into park. Look, Ben, I don't know you at all. I picked you up because, frankly, I'm scared shitless out here alone. Taking that tone of voice with me just adds to the already uneasy feeling I have. I've heard the stories. I've read the headlines about what happens out here. Anything you tell me can help both of us survive this night. The irritation in her voice was apparent, causing Ben to stiffen even more. What stories have you heard? He asked, turning to face her, his amber eyes boring into her brown ones. Tell me, because I'd like to know if it's as terrifying as what I've seen. I've heard of a winged lizard that attacks people. That's all you've heard? In a nutshell, yes. That part is true. It is a winged lizard. But it's more than that, too. Go on, she replied. Start driving again. Get us the hell out of here and I will tell you. Kathy put the car in drive and stepped on the accelerator, hearing her wheels spin under the gravel before they found purchase and the car jerked forward. I was out here hunting with a friend early this morning, Ben started. We'd set up a small camp in a clearing about 200 feet from the road. We were setting up the deer blind when we first saw it, just before sunrise. The thing was huge, probably had a wingspan of 20 feet. It flew swiftly and circled us a few times before it swooped down and picked up my friend Diane. I got a good look at it, and its fangs hung well over its lower jaw, probably 6 or 8 inches. As it lifted Diane off the ground, it swung her up and into its mouth. It bit down on her waist and split her in two. I stood there watching my friend get eaten alive by this creature. As it consumed the first half of Diane, it circled again, picked up the other half, and swallowed it in one bite. When I was finally able to run, I took off in the opposite direction of where the road was, and the creature followed me. I found a small cave and hid in there. Much to my surprise, the creature landed in front of the cave and turned into a human right before my eyes. He entered the cave, and I could see his fangs were still protruding from his mouth, traces of Diane's blood still dripping off. When Ben stopped speaking, Kathy glanced over at him and saw that he was ghostly white. His eyes were wide with fear, and she could see him trembling. She took his hand and held it tightly, for her own comfort as well as his. Ben squeezed her hand tightly, enjoying the small feeling of comfort from her. The man that stood before me in the cave wasn't much taller than me. As he approached, his fangs diminished until they were nothing more than regular teeth. He had blood in the corners of his mouth, and his eyes glowed an eerie red. He told me that I was lucky to have chosen that cave to hide in. It was part of a sacred Indian burial ground, and he could not attack while he was within its boundaries. As he turned to leave, he warned me again to stay in the cave. It was what was best for me. As he left the cave, he turned into the creature once more and flew away. I stood there, unable to move my feet. I looked around the cave and saw there was nothing there. No food, No water. Nothing. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I'd starve or die of thirst. I propped myself against a rock in one corner and fell asleep until nightfall. When I woke up, I immediately left the cave and looked for the creature. When I didn't see it, I started back toward the road. Just as I reached our campsite, I heard a noise overhead. When I looked up, I saw those same eerie red glowing eyes gazing down at me. The creature was circling again. I started running toward the road and tripped on a fallen branch. The creature swooped down and I managed to roll out of the way. When I brought myself to my feet, I heard an ear-splitting screech, then the creature disappeared. I wandered for about an hour before you picked me up. Kathy had reached the fork in the road and followed it to the right as Ben instructed. She could see the lights of the city in the distance and breathed a sigh of relief that they were almost to the highway. "I'm sorry about your friend, Ben," she said, not really knowing what else to say. "Thank you, Kathy. We're almost out of here," she said, pointing to the lights ahead. Kathy relaxed and felt Ben's grip loosen on her hand. "Turn right up here," Ben said as he saw them approach another intersection. "But it looks like the freeway is straight ahead," Kathy replied. "Just do it," he barked, the sound of his voice sending a chill down Kathy's spine. She jerked harshly on the wheel, causing the car to skid around the corner. Kathy wasn't paying attention to the curves in the road. She was more interested in what was happening with Ben. His voice sounded different to her, igniting the fear she'd felt when he was telling his story. His grip on her hand tightened, and he kept his eyes focused straight ahead. She glanced over at him to see his eyes glowing an eerie red. She tried to pull her hand from his, but he held it tightly. As she turned her attention back to the road, she saw she was heading straight for a tree. She jerked the wheel hard to the left, causing the back end of the car to swerve and slam into the tree. "Kathy!" Ben's voice echoed in her head as blackness consumed her. "Kathy! Wake up! Kathy!" Ben shouted, shaking her gently. "No! Get away from me!" Kathy screamed, kicking her feet and slapping Ben away from her. "Kathy! Wake up!" he shouted again. Her hands and feet continued to thrash about as she woke up and became aware of her surroundings, knocking Ben to the floor. "Where am I?" she asked. "What happened?" "You were having a nightmare, Kathy," Ben replied. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine," she said, feeling her heartbeat slowly return to normal. "Ben?" "Yeah," he said, taking her hand and squeezing it gently. "How do you know me?" "Maria introduced us," he said. "You said you weren't feeling well, so she told you to come in here and lie down." Kathy looked around and saw that she was still at her friend Maria's Halloween party. She was in the den, stretched out on the small couch in the corner. A large handmade Afghan pulled up around her. "Oh God!" she cried, bringing one hand up to cover her mouth. "It was awful, Ben." "What was awful?" he asked, pulling a chair up beside the couch. "I had a dream that I was driving home and I had to take a detour because of a roadblock," she started. "It was horrible. The detour took me to a road so narrow that I heard the branches scraping against the sides of my car, and I heard someone talking to me. Just when I thought I was going out of my mind, I saw you and picked you up." "That doesn't sound so bad," Ben said, smiling softly at her. "We were on Demon Drive and you were—" "Oh God, Ben," she cried, pulling her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. It was so real. She told him everything she remembered about the dream she just had, still trembling with fear at the fact that it seemed so real. Ben reached out and took Kathy in his arms, hugging her gently. "It was just a bad dream, Kathy." He caressed her hair softly and was thankful she couldn't see the eerie red glow in his eyes at the feel of her against him. "Everything will be okay," he added, trying to keep himself in control. Kathy pulled away from him and wiped her eyes on her sleeve before she turned her gaze to him again. "I think I should go home," she said, pushing the Afghan off and getting to her feet. "That dream is still haunting me, and I'm not going to be much fun tonight." "You're not going alone," Ben said, taking her hand before she could get away. "Let me go with you to make sure you make it home safely." After the dream she just had, she welcomed the company for the drive home. She folded the Afghan neatly and placed it across the back of the couch. "Let me say goodbye to Maria before we go," she said, crossing the room and opening the door without looking at him. Ben stood and watched her walk out of the den, an evil smile crossing his face and his eyes once again glowing an eerie red. "Soon, Kathy. Soon, you'll be mine," he said quietly, his voice chillingly deep and feral. After Kathy said her goodbyes, she headed out to her car, Ben close behind. "How will you get home after you make sure I've made it safely?" she asked, shifting into drive. "Oh, don't you worry about me. I have my ways and everything has been taken care of already. My main concern right now is you." Kathy's drive home resembled that of her dream, right down to the detour sign in the road. She was leery about taking that same route again, even if the first time was just in a dream. She drove a bit further down the road, in hopes there would be another turn off or something, anything other than having to take Demon Drive. Unfortunately for her, that was the only way around the accident ahead. Kathy was forced to take Demon Drive as the sheriff directed her that way. "Ma'am, you just have to take it about 2 miles to get around this accident, then you can get right back on at the Hollow Point Junction. You'll see it right after you exit the third curve. It'll be to your right. Drive safely, ma'am," the sheriff said as he returned to the mangled cars on the road. With white knuckles, Kathy turned off the main highway onto the gravel road of Demon Drive. All she wanted to do was stomp on the gas and get the hell off that road, but as soon as she did, her car fishtailed, gravel shooting every which way from beneath her tires. "Hey, slow down a little," Ben shouted as he settled back into his seat. "I want to make it out of here alive as much as you do, but getting in an accident won't help the matter much now, will it?" Kathy slowed down to just over 30 miles per hour. Her car continued to swerve, but at least she could handle it, and the recovery wasn't so severe as before. She continued to have that eerie feeling of the trees hugging her car as she passed between them. They were exactly as they appeared in her dream. Watching her odometer, she counted the miles as she drove. She let out a sigh of relief when she entered the third curve. The feeling of relief didn't last long, however. She heard the voices start again, just as they did in her dream. Come out wherever you are. Are you trying to run from me again? I missed you the first time, but I will not miss this time, and that's a promise." Kathy heard the voice in a whisper at first, but gradually increasing to that eerie-sounding tone by the time it finished speaking. Kathy glanced at Ben. This time he didn't appear to be nervous at all. His voice was calm as he told her they were almost to the main highway, and he was sitting in his seat cool as could be. Kathy approached the junction and turned left to get back on the paved road. She took the entrance marked east at 50 miles per hour. Her tires squealed and the car was unsteady as she finally made it to the straightaway and resumed control of her steering once again. "Oh, thank God," Kathy stated, still nervous and trembling, but the more she drove the calmer she became. "How far do you live from here, Kathy?" Ben asked, a little fidgety now. "Oh, it's not far from here, just about 6 miles up the road, then a right turn and another 2 miles after that. My house is on that road." Looking around, Ben noticed that the road was absolutely deserted. There were no lights anywhere to be seen. "Hey, I gotta take a leak. Can you pull over up there?" Pointing to a group of trees to the side of the highway. She didn't really want to stop, but figured if she didn't, he might not make it all the way to her house and she would have a mess to clean up because he had been drinking. She pulled to the right slowly, 2 of her tires on the dirt and 2 on the pavement, so she wouldn't get stuck. Ben opened his door, got out, then closed it tightly behind him before walking off into the darkness for what Kathy thought was to relieve himself. As soon as he was out of sight, the voices started again, louder and fiercer this time. Violent scrapes were heard on her roof, denting the thick metal. "I've got you now, Kathy." The voice echoed like a demon in the still of the night. Ben, will you please hurry up?" Kathy screamed in the direction he walked. "Oh, my precious little one, I just want to be with you," the voice said, quieter. Kathy was trembling in her seat. That surely sounded like Ben's voice, she thought to herself, then shook her head as if she was hearing things. As quickly as the voice and noises came, they stopped. She sat there, frozen behind the wheel for some time. Still no sign of Ben. She called out to him once more, and then decided she wasn't putting her life in danger just for some guy she just met, so she shifted to drive and sped off. As she steadied the car, she glanced in her rearview mirror. Ben came running out of the trees, his eyes glowing that eerie red he spoke of in her dream. Kathy screamed and put the pedal to the metal, tires smoking as she drove even faster down the deserted highway. "Only a few more minutes on this road and I will get to my exit," she thought to herself. But as she turned to look behind her, she passed her exit. She slammed on her brakes to back up and attempt the exit one more time, and when she did, she saw Ben morph from his human form to the lizard creature she'd heard him talk about in her dream. Petrified, she couldn't move her feet to the gas pedal. She screamed, but no sound was heard as the creature attacked her vehicle once again, just as it did in her dream. Talons sliced through the thick metal of her roof, gouging into her chest and arms. The car jostled about like a child with a toy. Ben seemed to be having fun with her as he broke the driver's side window and pulled her blood-soaked body from the mangled wreck, tossing her into the air a few times before he let her down. "Try running from me now, my pretty little one," Ben said in his human voice that had once calmed her earlier. She watched in horror as he morphed from the lizard to human right before her eyes, causing her to faint momentarily. As she came to, Kathy clawed at the grass and gravel beneath her, trying desperately to get away from him. I have been searching for a new mate, Kathy, Ben said in that chilling voice. Diane didn't prove to be worthy, he added. Your dream was more real than you think, Kathy. I was with you, controlling your mind, telling you things you wanted to hear. Diane was foolish to run from me. She was foolish to try to hide. She met the same fate that you two shall meet. No, she cried weakly, reaching for a branch that had fallen to the ground. When I found you, I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd make you mine, he added, still walking slowly toward her. You see, I've been watching you for quite some time. I thought you more than worthy to be my mate. She ignored the pain in her arms as she swung the branch, catching Ben in the knees and causing him to stumble slightly away from her. If you would have waited for me, if you didn't try to run, I would have made it worth your while to join with me, he said, stalking toward her as she struggled to right herself, using the branch for support. Please, just leave me alone, she cried, stumbling and falling to the ground once more. Ben morphed back into the creature, his red eyes glowing brighter with anger. With one flap of his mighty wings, he was circling above Kathy once more. You give me no choice, Kathy, she heard Ben's voice in her head. I couldn't get to you in your dreams, but there is no escaping me now. Kathy waved the branch blindly in the air, grunting when the creature swooped low and knocked it from her hands. Her vision blurred as the pain from her wounds continued to increase. She dragged herself to her feet once more, stumbling in the direction of her car. She felt Ben's massive talons pierce her back, then a loud screech came from above her. As she lay on the cold gravel, just inches from her mangled car, she heard Ben's voice a final time. Perhaps by next Halloween I shall be able to find an adequate mate, he said as he ascended into the night sky and disappeared into the darkness, watching as the life slowly drained from Kathy. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hello, and welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles. Sometimes you just have to wonder what in the world was God thinking when he shuffled that deck of cards and dealt the hand you've lived with for the last 18 years. I think back on it and sometimes wish I had chosen a different response, but then I wouldn't be watching two wonderful kids setting out for a Grand Tetons adventure with half a dozen of their friends they have known since childhood. Dave was born 20 years ago, and Kylie followed 2 years later. For the last 2 decades, they have been my chief concern in life. They have had everything they needed and a good number of their wants as well, but neither of them ended up spoiled in any sense. They both held part-time jobs while in high school, and I couldn't ask for a better adjusted pair of kids. Their mother, on the other hand, well, she is a different story altogether. Her name is Tammy, and except for the fact that she is my 40-year-old wife and my name is Ted Walton, I'm not going to go into the details of the courtship and how I nailed her in the back seat of her daddy's Buick and how her daddy ran me off with a pitchfork. All true as a matter of fact. I think the 43-year-old Ted Walton of today had his start 18 years ago. When I was a young boy, my mom had a theory that if all the neighbor moms would circulate all their children together when one of them got the mumps, we could all get it over at the same time. Well, she tried. She would pack all of us off to the neighbor's house every time some kid in the neighborhood caught them. They would do the same. My brother Jimmy caught them when I was 7, and my mom just about had him coughing all over me day and night. Funny thing was I never got them, at least not until I was 20 years old. It was the most horrendous experience I have gone though. They have inoculations for it now, but then, if they did, I didn't know anything about it. I caught the mumps from the kids of one of my coworkers during a summer job between semesters. It ruined my whole summer and put a damper on certain recreational activities that Tammy and I had grown quite fond of. My armpits swelled up, my throat was worse than softballs, but the worst of all was the gonads. I literally could not walk. My balls were swollen and hurt like hell. The doctor gave me some pills and told me to stay off my feet as if that was going to be a problem, and eventually the swelling went down. However, my nuts were sore as hell all summer, and I know I wasn't the only one not happy about it. Tammy was agitated for a while, but oddly about a month before I had to go back to school, she seemed to get over it. By the time I had to leave, things were back to normal, and I tried to squeeze in as much screwing in 1 week as I lost in the summer. A year later, and we married. Both of us with fresh degrees and ready to conquer the world. We settled in a little town next door to where we grew up just outside of Memphis and decided to start a family. Well, that took over a year of trying every position known to man and woman. Some we invented. Somehow, Tammy got pregnant and David Walton came into the world. He had his mother's red hair and blue eyes instead of my brown and brown, but I could not have been more proud. I rocked him, burped him, and changed his crappy diapers. I did it all. I even weaned him when Tammy worked the night shift at the hospital. If ever there was a bond between father and son, it was with us. A couple years later, a little girl named Kylie joined the family, and Tammy now felt we were a complete family unit. She went and had her tubes tied right after the birth, not even consulting me on the matter. It was done. Whatever the case, I bonded with Kylie just as I did with Dave. A couple months after Kylie was born, I started having a nagging ache in one of my testicles, and a guy at work told me I needed to get that checked out real quick. One of his brothers had testicular cancer a few years ago, and he thought the symptoms were similar. Ted, take this cup in there and bring back a sperm sample, she said with only half a grin on her face. She handed me an old copy of Hustler, laughing the whole time. As I walked to the bathroom, when I returned, I just smiled right back at her. A few days later, I met with my doctor. Ted, it's mostly good news. You have a rather benign cyst on your right testicle. I'm going to remove it, and you'll be sore for a while. That is what he did, and as I was sitting there waiting for Nurse Jism to bring me the pain scripts, he made another comment. The other interesting thing is that your sperm count came back 0. Did you get tested after you had the mumps while in college? I shook my head. Well, with all the scarring that is evident, that was most likely the cause. If you want to have kids, you and the missus will have to adopt. The room didn't go dark, and I didn't throw a conniption fit. I thanked the doctor and Nurse Jism. I made my way out to my car and sat in it for quite a while. What the scumsucker, son of a witch. I ran out of words in short order. If I had been armed, I might have gone home and laid her out. If I've been sterile, there is no way I'm the father of my 2 kids. No way. Now, I'm generally a thinking man most of the time, and I needed to think. Did she believe I would never find out? Who was the scumsucker who screwed my wife? Do the kids have the same baby daddy? That last question struck me as important. If they have the same baby daddy, that means she has been screwing the same guy for at least the past 3 years. We've only been married less than 5. I needed to think this out. They didn't have reliable and quick DNA stuff back then, or if they did, it was way too expensive. What I did have was a good deputy friend who did some sleuthing on the side. Billy Bubba Jim Bob. You redneck hillbilly, how are you? He looked at me and just said, smart man, as he handed me an open long neck. He was my best friend in high school, and he went to a community college earning a degree in criminal justice, which is really a training school for cops. I thought he would have been an engineer or something, but he was happy doing that. Real happy. So, you know for a fact she's taking some strange up the quim, Junior? I know somebody else put those babies in her. You remember when I had those mumps? He nodded his head. Well, it killed the swimmers is what it did. I've been firing blanks for the last 5 years. Hell, if I had known that, those rubbers would have hit the trash when we were still dating. He nodded some more, tipped up the long neck, and brought back 2 more. Okay, so here is how it works. First, you need to get a blood test for each of the kids. That's easy. Tell her that there is a free registry with the sheriff's department to protect against missing kids when some scumsucker snatches them, fingerprints, and blood samples. That way you'll know if there is a blood type problem that says for sure you aren't the father. Next, you just keep on keeping on. I'll cover her, but like molasses on a stick. If so much as a fly lands on that butt, I'll know it. You just gotta cover costs. This is between friends. When he said that's what he would do, I knew he meant it. We polished off a couple more beers, and before I left he told me, Junior, when we nail the prick that's tapping your woman and we know for sure, you and I are gonna go out and hook up with a couple very fine young ladies that have been giving me the playground eyes for quite some time. You are gonna get some payback sex and good. That's how we parted, and that is how we met again a couple weeks later. Okay, Junior, sit down. I did, and he laid it out for me. Tammy was photographed going into the Ramada Inn, 2nd floor, room 221 with a shithead named Michael Cookson. He's a shithead because both Billy and I knew him from our school days. Okay, here's the hard part. He slid over a VHS tape. They have been using the same room for the past month, according to the clerk, so we got him to give us access to the room and placed the camera in the ceiling vent. It's not the best picture quality, but you got sound and action and all the evidence you need that they are actually screwing each other. Hell, that's smarts, but it was real life. I didn't want to watch the video, but I took it and put it in my case. That's when I told him my plan. Billy, here's the deal. Those kids might not be mine, but I love them like they are my own flesh and blood. Somebody once told me an old cliche, but I think it's true. Revenge is best served cold. I'm going to raise my kids, but I'm going to burn those morons, but good when the time comes. I'd like the clerk to let us know if they stop showing up at the Ramada, and if they do, we'll figure out their new cooch hole. I've got 18 years in front of me to get these kids raised up right. In the meantime, let's have a couple cold ones and see if we can't find some of that young girl you've been talking about. That's what we did, and Billy wasn't kidding. They were actually a couple nurses from the same hospital Tammy worked at. That made me a bit nervous at first, but when Michelle shimmied out of her clothes and laid back on the motel bed, I didn't waste any more time. When we were done, we made a date for a repeat. For the next couple of months, we went at it like a couple of excited high school kids. One time, she told me she saw my wife at work that afternoon. She works on our floor now, starting this week on days like us. All she talks about is you, but then she runs off with that prick she is seeing during lunch. Yeah, I know about that, the Michael Cookson a-hole. She has been screwing him for years. So why don't you leave her? I told her about the kids and why I wanted to raise them. Surprisingly, she was supportive. So you are going to just stay married until they grow up and keep a woman on the side the whole time? I looked at her closely. She was looking at me seriously, perhaps appraising me. I think that's probably the best approach. Okay, well, I'd like to stick around for the ride as long as it works. I like you. I like you a lot. So we stuck it out. Michelle and I were a good fit. She knew my wife was a cheating 304. She knew I just wanted to raise 2 children that were fathered by somebody else. And she was fantastic. After about a year, I started working my finances. I slowly started siphoning off about 10% of my income and stashing it in an out-of-state bank. When the bonuses and raises started coming in, off they went to the siphon fund. The balance kept growing and Michelle and I kept up our relationship. If anything, I think we were falling in love. In fact, I know it, but I was still married to Tammy. One thing was bothering me a bit, and I couldn't figure it out. Michelle kept telling me that all Tammy ever talked about at work was how great her husband was, how good a daddy he was, even hints about being a stud in the sack. All of it was true, of course, but if she was giving up the quim every week to that a whole cookson, why in hell would she talk about me all the time? I couldn't wrap my mind around that. I screwed her every Saturday night like clockwork. I couldn't have done much more because Michelle was getting the best of me on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday afternoons. Tammy never complained or ever sought out more. I knew Cookson was nailing her once a week, so I guess twice was good enough. Did I feel like a shit screwing another woman? All I had to do was think about how she had been cucking me for years. That took care of any guilt. I think the worst part of it was I knew I was screwing Michael Cookson's longtime woman even though I was married to her. I think I wanted to kill him for the longest time. The next couple of years were pretty smooth. I was doing well in the company and received a promotion along with a pretty nice increase in compensation. Michelle moved up at the hospital and was now a charge nurse on the same floor as Tammy. That meant she was Tammy's boss. That generated a few interesting bedtime discussions, but Michelle, if she was anything, she was fair. Tammy did pretty well working for her. My siphon fund was growing nicely, and with 3 years of bonuses and increases added to it, I had almost a full year's salary tucked away already. Michelle and I sat down one evening and had a long talk. Michelle, what do you really think about me? It was one of those questions that she had to really think hard about because I wanted a serious answer. Ted, I'm going to be straight up and honest here, you know that. We've been together 4 years now, and if you were not already married, I'd be chasing you night and day to get that ring on my finger. But I know that can't happen, at least for now. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed by that. But I'd also be lying to myself if I said I didn't love you like nobody else. I get you a third of the time, and I've had to make do with that. I guess my big concern right now is that I don't want to be a kept woman. I want something to come out of this. How do we do that? I didn't have any really good answers for that. Human nature supplied them later. Michelle came in from work one day, and while she didn't say those damn words, I saw it in her face. She sat in my lap, kissed me, and led me into the bedroom. We had really great sex, and when we finished and showered, she sat me down and told me what I already knew. I stopped her with a finger to her lips. You don't have to say anything. I'll miss you greatly, and if our paths cross again down the road, I'll walk another mile or many with you anytime. She wanted a family, and I couldn't provide it. I had a family of my own to attend to, so I did. We ran into each other on occasion, and I knew she had found a guy and married him, and we remained good friends. So 4+ years after my discovery, I was back home. No Michelle and a wife who was still screwing her a-hole boyfriend. We still did our Saturday nights, so I wasn't going without, but for me, I was just getting a piece of, but off a 304. What I did still have, though, were my kids, and I showered my attention on them. I made sure to take them everywhere, and I excluded Tammy every chance I could. I took them camping, hiking, to ball games, everything. I hope I instilled everything decent needed for being well-rounded adults later. When they came home from school, it was me they came to. When they needed anything, I was the source. A few more years went by. My siphon fund was growing to a very respectable balance, and periodically, I would move funds to an offshore account and then move them again. You would have to be a serious forensic accountant to find them and link them to me. I was making 3 times what I was making 10 years earlier, yet Tammy was none the wiser. She had her own pretty decent income, and between us, the house was nearly paid off. Now, the funny thing, well, in hindsight, was that the house was titled in my name only, same thing with the mortgage. So, technically, all the equity was accruing for my use. By year 12 of the big discovery, as I started calling it, the house was paid off, and through appreciation over the years, it was worth double what we paid for it. Technically, I could pull out 80% of the equity in another mortgage when the time came without having to include Tammy in the transactions. Billy and I still hooked up regularly, although he had married a sweet girl who thought his redneck, but was made of gold. She had given him a couple kids by then, so he was staked down to suburbia pretty tightly. He also didn't cheat on her, so no more nurses for him. As for me, I didn't screw around really. I made it a few times with a woman I used to work with, but for the most part, one just contented myself with the Saturday night 304 sex. I made it good, though. In year 15, God struck a thunderbolt right up her butt. I got a call in the middle of the night. Tammy had gone on a weekend trip with her nurse friends to the NASCAR race up in Bristol. Of course, it was all bullshit. She was on a weekend bender with a-hole Cookson. Billy had one of his PIs watching her for this one. His business was full-time now, and everything was still at cost to me. Like I said, we go way back. The call was to inform me that my wife was in a hospital in Knoxville with serious injuries. They were not life-threatening, but she had been broken up a good bit with a broken leg, a couple busted ribs, and a really screwed-up face. The kids were teens then and could handle things here by themselves, so I headed to Knoxville driving all night. Interestingly, the kids didn't have any interest in how she was doing as long as she was alive. I think I smiled about that the whole way there. She not only wasn't a good wife, she was a lousy mother as well. I got to the hospital by morning, and when I walked into her room, she looked like total shit. Her head was bandaged up completely on one side. Both eyes were completely screwed up. Her nose was broken, and according to the doctor, she had a horrific gashed and jagged cut running from her ear to her mouth. She was going to need a few surgeries to get it looking reasonable. In a word, she was a mess. No, make that 2 words, a mess. She couldn't really talk, and I really didn't want to hear anything she said, but I sat there and held her hand, going through the motions of a caring spouse. I got the straw to her mouth when she needed it. She wasn't eating anything yet, and when she got to that point, it would be liquid diet and soft foods until we got some teeth put back in her head. She had lost several front teeth as well. I asked the doctor later if there were any other injured people in the wreck and told me that one other man had died on the scene and there were no other passengers in the car. He looked at me sympathetically but didn't offer any other information. The police officer who came by later was much more forthgiving. "Mr. Walton, I'll be plain speaking here. Your wife was a passenger in the car. One Michael J. Cookson was the driver and he was killed on impact. There were no other passengers in the vehicle. Now, just as plain, Mr. Walton, Mrs. Walton is one lucky woman. She should have died in that crash just like the driver. For whatever reason, she was laying down in the back seat, or so we think, and the seat back saved her life somehow. I don't know how, but they did. The driver, on the other hand, was ejected from the vehicle and killed upon impact with the concrete abutment. If you have any further questions, Mr. Walton, here's my card." With that, the officer left and I stood in the hallway just outside my wife's room. I can't say I was happy. Instead, I had an empty hollow pit feeling. In spite of all the cheating and cucking me with somebody else's baby daddy offspring, I still loved the woman I married. I just couldn't stand her. I stayed through Monday morning, and by then, Tammy had most of her wits about her. She wouldn't be walking anywhere soon and would most likely be in the hospital for the rest of the week. I called my work and took some leave. I then called the kids and everything was okay there. They were more concerned now and wanted to drive over. I let them make that decision. They showed up at the hotel later that evening. So, over the course of the week, Tammy gained a bit of strength and was ready to be discharged. We got her into my car with her broken leg, bandaged ribs, and really screwed up face. Kylie rode back with me, and Dave drove his own car back. It was mostly a quiet ride, and with Kylie in the car, I wasn't going to bring up anything about who she was riding with. The scumsucker certainly wasn't a nurse. Tammy couldn't talk much anyway, so it was mostly Kylie and I chatting. I looked over at her a couple of times and noticed the tears. The problem was I didn't know if the tears were because of the physical pain, her sorrow for what she had done, or her grief for the death of her long-time lover and baby daddy. At the same time, my heart hurt from the culmination of all this shit. I started doing some math in my head, again for the umpteenth time. She had to have been screwing that a-hole for at least 19 years. We had been married 18. I had run it around in my head a few times before. I remember the summer I had those mumps a year before we got married and how all of a sudden she was quite content not getting screwed, right out of the blue. I also knew that a-hole was around that summer because Billy and I both ran into the smug scumsucker one evening at the dairy hall. If my hunch was right, she had been giving him her sweet quim for 19 years. Hell, why didn't the scumsucker just get his own wife? I needed answers to that question someday. From Tammy. I knew I was getting mad, so I just took a breath and finished the ride. We got the witch settled in at home, and I went for a ride. I needed to clear my head. I was time to take the next steps, and with Cookson out of the way, I pretty much knew what I had to do. The reason I put myself through all this hell was because that baby daddy could have taken my kids away. Now, his putrid gray matter was plastered all over a concrete abutment on the side of a road on the other side of the state. I didn't need to worry about that anymore. I pulled my financial trigger. The house was worth almost 4 times what we paid for it almost 18 years ago. All the equity was in my name, even though in a divorce she would get half. My solution was simple. I took out an 80% equity loan against the house and walked out of the bank with $520,000. I didn't need her signature or knowledge of it at all. The title was in my name. I made 2 trips to Vegas over the next 2 months. I played some slots, gambled a bit, left some receipts here and there, and then parked most of that money in an offshore account. After 15+ years of doing this, I had almost $1.5 million squirreled away in offshore accounts that Tammy would have no way of knowing about. She would learn about the income and savings we held jointly, and I'd have to split that, but that was okay. I started buying a lot of lottery tickets and putting up a front of somebody who liked to gamble. If I got called on it, I'd just tell them I found out my wife had been cucking me for 18 years. Who in hell wouldn't have sympathy for me then? Tammy was slowly healing. The broken bones healed quickly. The facial injuries were more extensive. She had a lateral cut that had opened up her mouth all the way to her ear, and the scar tissue was awful since pieces of flesh had been ripped and were missing. Her nose had been flattened and straightened out, but it was clear it has been busted before. Tammy was always pretty, and she still was, but she wouldn't be making the covers of any magazines unless it was Mechanics Illustrated. She would also walk with a slight limp because of the extent of her leg injuries. After about a year, she was walking with that limp, and her face had pretty much healed, although with a unique Scarface appeal to it. She looked tough, like she had been in a few biker chick brawls. We had never talked about her weekend. Now was the time. So, Tammy, how did you happen to be in a car speeding down I-40 doing 80 miles per hour with a guy named Michael J. Cookson at 1 a.m. in the morning and live to tell about it? Huh. She kind of looked at me a bit sheepishly and then went for subtle defiance. It wasn't at all what you might think, Ted. That's interesting. I would have thought on a Saturday night you would have been upstairs getting that little quim of yours screwed to the mattress. Wait, you were on a road trip with nurses to go to the races. Now I remember. Tell me the truth, Tammy. I didn't think she would say it, but she went for a bit of it. Okay, I screwed up, all right, and look at me. Don't you think I'm paying for it? I spent the night with him, Dash. Hold it. Not the whole night. He spent the rest of the night smeared against a concrete bridge, or what was left of him. She started crying at this point. Who was he to you? A pickup, somebody you work with, longtime screw? I think I startled her at that point into thinking I didn't remember who Cookson was. Ted, he was a one-time thing. I swear. The girls and I were drinking too much and I got carried away. Next I knew we were heading down the highway and then, God, it was horrible. She started crying again. I wanted to laugh. So you didn't screw him? She shook her head no. Her face was a mess with the tears, and that garish scar creeping down to the corner of her lip. She looked like half a Joker without the face paint. I seriously wanted to laugh. She had been screwing the a-hole for 2 decades, and she says it was a one-timer without a sex. Tammy, I believe you as far as I can throw you, which is about 5 feet. Is there anything else you want to tell me before we end this conversation? I'm telling you the truth, Ted. I just walked away shaking my head. I hadn't screwed her since the week before her accident, and I pretty much knew then I wouldn't be touching her again. I started making plans. Then I really did gamble. Dave was 18 years old now and had just graduated. Kylie was almost 16 and would start her junior year in high school. I decided it was time to tell them and see what they would do. I had enough money stashed now, and they were old enough that there wasn't much more influencing left for me to do with them. So I started to lay it all out. Guys, we need to talk. I had just bought us all a cold pop, ginger ale. I need to tell you guys something about your mom and me, and you guys too, I guess. Kylie interrupted me. Dad, there isn't any need. This is about Mom and her shit-brain-dead boyfriend, isn't it? I looked at her a bit incredulously. We know, both Dave and I. I think we figured it out when I was around 13 or so. It also helped to find your secret stash above the garage. You need a better hiding spot. We both saw the old pictures and found the old VHS tape. We saw the blood test results and know what they mean. Plus, we went one step further than you, Dad. We got a DNA test done. It's easy to do now and we know. You are our real dad regardless of who was popping Mom's rocks on the nights we were made. You raised us, fed us, nurtured us, and taught us everything we know about how to be good people, and you were stuck with us whether you like it or not. I didn't know what to say. I was looking at a 35-year-old, 16-year-old. They both hugged me and I wept. After I pulled myself together, because men shouldn't get like that, I looked at them and told them I was ready to leave their mother, but they were old enough to make decisions for themselves. Kylie came right out with it again. Dad, I'm not going to stay with my mom. She might have given birth to me, and maybe way down the road someday, I'll think different. But, for now, I'm going to walk away from her. I have been waiting knowing you were going to leave, but also knowing you were staying just because of us. So, if I have a choice, I'll stay with you. Dave chimed in at that point. Dad, we already checked with a lawyer. Kylie can make that choice once she's 16, and that's next month. So it was a plan. My kids were already in the know. Tammy was in denial, and I was ready to make the break. Then I started having second thoughts. The scumsucker was dead. My wife was a busted-up mess of a woman, and I had nobody to go to. I was only 41, and certainly young enough to make a good go at another woman. Hell, that was the plan all along. Raise him up, head on out. Tammy got her old job back after a few long talks with HR and the nursing supers. She even started back up with her benefits and salary increases in line with where she left off. Financially, she would be okay. Well, except she didn't know about the big mortgage on the house. There was only about 20% equity left to speak of. I laid the papers out in front of her one evening with the simple splits, 50/50ths down the middle. I told her about my gambling problems and how I didn't have anything left, and then I told her why. Tammy, I know all about Michael Cookson. You remember when I had those mumps years ago? And I couldn't screw you the way you wanted. Hell, the way I wanted to. I know that Michael Cookson was tapping your little quim way back then. She tried to protest, but I held up my hand. You remember how we tried to baby into you back when we first got married? Somehow a miracle occurred. Then the same thing with Kylie, but I recall you didn't try so hard with me that time, but still, you got knocked up. But there is something you don't know. I pulled out my test results that showed 0 swimmers from the doctor's office those many years ago. The paper was a bit yellowed, but she could read it. Her jaw dropped when she realized what it said. Then I pushed a photo in front of her. It was her going into the Ramada Inn, room 221 2 months after Kylie was born. She looked up at me. You've known all these years and said nothing? I nodded and continued. I needed to raise my babies, Tammy. They might not have my genes, but they have my name, and I've loved them more than anything since I first laid eyes on them. You want to know more? They know too. I didn't tell them. They figured it all on their own. Was Cookson their baby daddy? She nodded yes and stared at the floor. Tammy, look up at me. I betted you as my wife once a week for most of the last 17 years since I've known. I didn't shirk my duty as your husband. Now, I wasn't always faithful, but then, my marriage died when I found out 17 years ago. You have never been faithful. I guess my question is a simple one. Why? She stared at the floor for a long time before replying. Ted, I wish I knew why I didn't stop it a long time ago. Fear, I guess, afraid you would find out and leave. By the time I found courage, it was too late. Michael Cookson, and yes, he was an a-hole, started by blackmailing me. You are right that I had screwed him when we were young before getting married. It was a mistake, and it only happened a couple of times. Then a bit after we got married, I was out with some of my work friends, and we were drinking at some bar. Well, I ended up drinking too much, and of all people, Michael showed up. I honestly don't remember all that much after then, other than I know he was screwing me on a couple occasions that night. I think one of the nurses gave me cover and called you, telling you she was taking me home with her as I was puke drunk. Well, Michael used me all night. He took pictures, everything. A week later, he met me at work and laid it out. I'd have to screw him, or you would know. Then the worst happened. I was pregnant, and I knew right off the bat it had to be Michael's. I watched the calendar religiously, and I ended up being a stupid drunk sex right at the height of my fertility. I could have died. I was in for a pound at that point. Michael had me every week until I got too big. After Dave came, he was after me again, telling me he would tell you the baby was his. I was mortified, so I relented. I ended up getting knocked up again a year later, and when Kylie was born, I had my tubes tied so it couldn't happen again. To keep Michael quiet, I agreed to let him do it once a week. I thought he would grow tired of me and move on. I prayed he would, but he never did. I put up with him and my shame for all these years. I think I realized several years ago that it would never end well, but my denial kept me going. I never once had an orgasm with the man. I was just a piece of meat to him, and after 15 minutes, he was up and gone, every time. So now you know why, Ted. Push me those papers and I'll sign whatever you want me to, and I'll get out of your way. She sat there looking at her hands, and I pushed the papers in front of her. She didn't even read them. She just signed them. Ted, if you want, I'll take them to the lawyer's office and sign them again in front of them if they need me to. At that, she got up and went into the other room and sat down in her easy chair and cried. She was a completely broken woman. If what she said was true, she submitted to blackmail all these years just to keep me from finding out what I already knew. I looked at the papers on the table and picked them up and put them in my case along with the evidence of her infidelity. I had told her I wasn't always faithful over these years, but I didn't tell her about Michelle. That was just a sweet memory that was a could have been in another life. The life I had lived was as a cucked man raising another man's 2 children and loving every moment with them. I just didn't know what to believe from her anymore. When I looked back on it, it was worth it. I had kept my promise to myself to raise them as mine and have 2 children that loved me when they became adults. I would be able to watch them get married and have grandchildren to play with. It is what I wanted with my wife when I married her. So, we drifted like that for the next year and a half or so. I had the papers still in my case. Tammy was making the payments on a house she couldn't afford. I had taken a small apartment nearby, and Kylie had moved in with me until I told her that she really needed to stay with her mom, or it could be that she might not have a mom left. Tammy was slowly falling to pieces, and I think she needed the support. After Kylie moved back home, things started to even out a bit. The two of them seemed to bond somewhat, and Kylie began doing things with her mom. I encouraged her, and at one point I even sat down and explained what Tammy had told me about Michael Cookson. I considered it therapy for the both of them. Dave had gone off to school in Knoxville, and I was living the boring middle-aged single life. I hadn't chased any women, although I certainly had the opportunity. When the office heard that I was living on my own, I was surprised how many single, divorced women were working in my building. I got invited to everything. The women who had never been married were few, but the divorcees were like sharks in the water looking for fresh blood. I was sitting in a park one morning just watching the kids play and enjoying the fresh air. A little girl and her mom caught my eye, and there was just something familiar about the mom that I could not for the life of me put my finger on. I watched them play and run with each other, and there was a wonderful joy between them. It reminded me of when my kids were young. At some point, the mom stood up and pulled her cap off her head, and a long cascading flow of blonde curls fell loose down her back, and when she turned toward my direction, I realized who she was. It was Michelle. I sat back and watched them play. I didn't know she was still living in the area. In fact, I was certain she had married and moved away. They were tossing a ball around, and at some point it rolled over toward where I was seated. I reached down and picked it up, tossing it toward the young girl running my way. When she was closer, I recognized her as her mother's daughter. She was the spitting image. The little girl ran back down toward her mom, and they resumed. Michelle didn't notice me, that I could tell, and I rose up and left the park. I was having coffee one morning down on the corner from my place, and she slid in across from me. "Ted, you are looking good these days." "Michelle, I could say the same." We appraised each other for a bit. "You didn't come over and say hi the other day." "Neither did you?" "I didn't want to rile a husband if he were lurking. It wouldn't be fair to him." She laughed lightly at that. "He's been gone for 3 years now." "Oh, I'm sorry." "Don't be. I caught him screwing our next-door neighbor and nearly castrated him right there." "Well, I can appreciate the sentiments." We sipped our coffees and chatted about everything for quite a while. Her little girl was 6 and her name was Cassie. She had been born in Atlanta, and when the marriage went south, Michelle brought the two of them back to the area and was living in Memphis until recently. "So did you ever divorce her?" she asked. "I have the signed papers at home, but I haven't had them processed." I think she pondered that for a good while before a small smile crossed her lips. "You've got a soft heart, Ted. I've always loved that about you. Are you going to give her a chance to redeem herself?" I needed to answer that question. We were not a couple yet. I hadn't really pulled the trigger and didn't know why. I remembered loving her those years ago. I remembered Michelle tell me how much Tammy talked about me at work. Then, just as quick, I would recall that scumsucker screwing my wife year after year. "I think I'm just trying to find the time." I lied. She just chuckled. When she finished her coffee, she pulled out a business card from her bag and handed it to me. "Ted, please call me sometime and let's have lunch. I'm back at the hospital here and, well, sometimes I just like to have a friend to talk to, and I'm a good listener." We hugged each other, and I watched her leave and crossed the street to her car. Later that evening, I was looking over the divorce papers, and I came to a conclusion that I was going to give Tammy a chance to redeem herself. She looked tough as an old bird, but she did her best. She was actually quite attractive in her own jailbird kind of way. I headed over to the house and sat in the driveway for the longest time. I opened my case and pulled out all the papers, including copies of the infidelity evidence. My eyes fell to her eyes at the Ramada Inn. I shook my head and backed out of the drive as she stood there watching me. I got a wheel and actually laughed all the way down the street. The next morning, I dropped the papers off at the lawyer's office, told him to file, and I went out and bought the biggest cheeseburger I could find and washed it down with 2 Sam Adams. Staring at the old photograph and the close-up of the couple, I peered into the eyes of lovers and not those of a victim and her perpetrator. The other thing I never noticed before or paid any attention until the photo was blown up was the oversized high school varsity jacket she was wearing. I never had one, but that scumsucker Michael Cookson did. I sat on that bench watching my 2 kids board the plane for an adventure with several of their friends. Cassie ran up to me just as they were going through the gate. Her mom was right behind her. I gave both of them a big hug, and we waved at the departing entourage. The day I ate that cheeseburger was the day I knew I was going to marry Michelle, and we set the date during dinner last night with my 2 kids, Cassie, Michelle, and I. Dave will be my best man. Kylie will be a bridesmaid, and Cassie will be the flower girl. Tammy didn't take it too well for a while, but she learned to adjust. I think she also understands I could care less. As for my stash, she knows nothing about it, and I just paid off my kids' college educations up front, and tomorrow, I'm paying cash for a new home for the 3 of us to grow old and happy in. It's been an 18-year engagement. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Jason Chandler's life seemed like the picture of success. Raised in a close-knit, supportive family, he had always been a hard worker, excelling in school and later in business. His father, a self-made entrepreneur, taught him the value of discipline and integrity, values Jason carried into adulthood. A business degree from a reputable university, coupled with his natural acumen, positioned him for a promising career in the family's flourishing tire company. Jason wasn't just ambitious. He was a man of principle, intent on creating a life filled with purpose and stability. Karen Thornton had always been charming and ambitious, qualities that had initially drawn Jason to her. She came from a modest background, but had grand aspirations. Her determination to rise above her circumstances fueled her drive, both in her career and personal life. By the time she met Jason at university, Karen had already mapped out her path to success, with real estate as her chosen field. She and Jason quickly became inseparable, their shared drive for achievement seemingly the perfect foundation for a life together. Their relationship blossomed, leading to a whirlwind romance that culminated in marriage. They bought their first home, a modest but comfortable house, within 2 years of graduating. Karen quickly established herself as a rising star in real estate, while Jason managed the accounting department of his father's business. Together, they epitomized the power couple, blending their professional successes with an apparent devotion to one another. Over time, cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect life. Karen's growing success in real estate introduced her to a high-paced, glamorous world that often pulled her away from Jason. Her long work hours, coupled with late-night client meetings, began creating distance in their relationship. Despite Jason's attempts to bridge the gap, their once solid bond began to erode, setting the stage for the turmoil to come. Jason Chandler reclined on the sofa, engrossed in his phone, when a call from his wife interrupted him. Karen's trembling voice instantly filled him with dread. Just hours earlier, a private investigator had revealed unsettling news. Karen and a man she had secretly been seeing were boarding a flight to Honolulu for a week-long getaway. The betrayal stung deeply, adding another layer of deceit to the mounting web of lies that had slowly unraveled their marriage. Jason couldn't shake the gnawing question of how he had overlooked the signs, even after years spent building a life together. He sighed, took a sip of his coffee, and leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the past decade. Jason and Karen had met 13 years ago in college while studying business. They'd quickly fallen in love, married, and built a life together. Jason had joined his father's successful tire business, eventually taking over the accounting department, while Karen thrived in real estate. They had a nice home, new cars, and seemed to have it all, except for children. Karen had told him her fallopian tubes were tied, and when Jason suggested adoption, she shot it down. Over time, he accepted they would remain childless, but recently things had felt off. Karen began spending more time out with friends, going from occasional happy hours to multiple late nights a week. Jason voiced his concerns, but Karen dismissed them, claiming work stress was to blame. One night, after a particularly late return, smelling of cigarette smoke, he confronted her. She insisted it was just drinks and dancing, but Jason knew something wasn't right. She apologized, but the tension lingered. Over the next few months, their closeness faded. What had been regular sex now dwindled to once every 2 weeks. Karen seemed more distant, no longer asking about Jason's day or showing interest in his life. Then, Jason caught her in a lie. He'd dropped by her office to surprise her for lunch, only to learn she had already left. That evening, she claimed she'd been at the office all day. He didn't confront her, but the lie stung. It made him wonder how many other times she had deceived him. Later, as they lay in bed, Jason confessed his worries about their relationship. Karen reassured him, but the doubt remained. Their connection felt strained, and Jason wasn't sure he could believe her anymore. She promised to show him she still loved him, but he wasn't convinced. That night, they made love, and while Jason felt a bit reassured, something still didn't feel right. Over the next month, things seemed better, but the distance returned. He kept wondering, what's happening to us? The truth began to surface when his old friend Ron Green called, asking to meet. "Sure, I'm up for a beer," Jason said. "What's going on?" "It's hard to explain over the phone," Ron replied urgently, "but it's important." Jason agreed to meet Ron at the bar. That evening, he was surprised to find Karen home early, as she usually stayed out later. At the bar, Ron didn't waste any time. "I saw your wife today while I was jogging," he said, leaning in. Jason looked up, intrigued. "Really?" "Yeah. I didn't know she was into holding hands and kissing clients." Jason frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ron's expression grew serious. "I wish I were joking. I saw Karen with some guy on Riverside Drive. They were kissing and all over each other." Jason's heart dropped. "No way." "Are you sure it was her?" Ron asked, showing Jason a photo. It was Karen. Jason stared, stunned. "Can you send me that?" Ron quickly sent the photo. "So what now?" Jason was lost for words. "I don't know, man. This is way more than I expected." Ron suggested a private investigator. "I can hook you up if you want." "Do it," Jason replied. "I need answers." Afterward, Jason returned home, where Karen was already in the kitchen. "You're home early," he said, kissing her. "Not complaining, just surprised." She kissed him back, smiling. "Where were you?" "Having a beer with Ron," Jason said. "Didn't think you'd be home yet." "Everything okay with him?" she asked. "Not exactly," Jason replied. "He found out his friend's wife is cheating." Karen's interest piqued. "Really?" "Yeah," Jason said, trying to gauge her reaction. "He saw her kissing a guy today." Karen briefly flinched, but quickly recovered. "Maybe he's mistaken." Jason stared at her, unsure. "I'm just glad I don't have that problem." She relaxed. I'd be devastated if that happened to me. Jason, feeling uneasy, kissed her forehead. I'm glad to hear that. I love you, Jace, she whispered, pulling him close. Jason sensed the tension but chose not to confront her yet. He wasn't ready. So, why are you home so early? He asked, changing the subject. The conference is this weekend, she replied brightly. I thought I'd pack and spend time with you before I leave. Where's the conference this year? Jason asked, feigning casual interest. Las Vegas, she said, at the Westgate Resort. I've heard it's nice. 4 stars, right? Yeah, she smiled. I'm really looking forward to it. But we do get some free time, too. When do you leave? Jason asked, trying to figure out their time together. Friday, right after lunch, she said. Did you win another award this year? Jason asked, knowing how successful she was. I think so, she shrugged. They haven't announced it, but I'm pretty sure. They kissed again, but Jason's mind stayed on edge. Her behavior had been off lately, and he couldn't shake the suspicion that she was hiding something. Why don't I walk you upstairs and congratulate you on another great year? Jason suggested, pushing his doubts aside, for now. She smiled, taking his hand. I was wondering when you'd offer, she teased. That evening they were intimate, but Jason couldn't shake his growing suspicions. Was she planning something while away this weekend? He wondered if the conference would be the turning point. Hey, I've got some time off coming up, Jason said, trying to lighten the mood. Why don't I come with you to Vegas? We could relax and maybe reconnect. Our 10th anniversary is coming up, he added, hoping to salvage something. That sounds fun, Karen replied, but I'll be busy with seminars and work afterward. Jason felt disappointed, but hid it. All right, maybe we can celebrate when you get back. I'll miss you, she smiled. The next morning, Jason contacted Ron for the private investigator's details. After setting up a meeting, he went to meet the investigator before lunch. Good morning, Mr. Chandler, greeted Jerry, the investigator, a middle-aged man with a weathered face. Jason explained his concerns about Karen's Vegas trip. Vegas, huh? Jerry raised an eyebrow. You think she's meeting someone? I'm not sure, Jason admitted. I've got some contacts there, Jerry said. We can keep an eye on her. If you want, we can even plant a camera in her hotel room, but that'll cost extra. I need to know the truth, Jason replied calmly. Jerry handed him a voice-activated recorder. Put it under her car seat. When she drives off, turn it on. We'll handle the rest. Good, Jason said, taking the recorder and a contact number. He paid with money he had saved for a vacation, money now redirected for another purpose. Later, Karen finished packing and Jason helped her with the bags. That's a lot of stuff for a weekend, he remarked, noticing the packed bags. Curious, he opened one and found a container of birth control pills, only 10 left. Wait, didn't she say her tubes were tied? His mind raced. Then he found a mix of business clothes, tiny clubbing dresses, and lacy lingerie. One bikini was so revealing it was only ever seen online. Jason took photos with his phone. Later, he placed the recorder under her car seat and watched her drive away. This could be the last time we're together, he thought. At breakfast the next morning, Karen handed him her room number and promised to call each night. I love you, she said, kissing his cheek. I love you too, Jason replied, his mind elsewhere. He gave her the room number and called Jerry. I'll get to work on it, Jerry assured him. Later, Karen called from the airport. I'll check in once I'm settled. Thanks, Jason replied, his voice strained. I love you, she said, and he couldn't help but think, yeah, I miss you too, lying to my face. But he only said, I'll miss you too. When he looked up, his father stood in the doorway, concern in his eyes. You okay, son? His father asked. Jason sighed. I don't know, Dad. His father nodded and led him to the study. Jason explained everything he'd uncovered. That doesn't sound like her at all, his father said, disbelief in his voice. I can't imagine Karen doing this. Neither can I, Jason muttered. If you need anything, we're here for you, his father reassured him. Thanks, Dad, Jason said, grateful for his support. Later that afternoon, Jason left work early and headed to the airport to track down Karen's car. He found it parked in the short-term lot and retrieved the recorder. The car was exactly as he expected, clean and organized, just like Karen always kept it. On the drive home, his phone rang. Hey, baby, Karen's voice chirped. Just wanted to let you know I made it. I'm glad to hear it, Jason said, his tone steady. I'm getting settled in. I'll call you tonight. Love you. I love you too, he replied, though his heart wasn't in it. When he got home, he plugged in the audio recorder, hoping for silence. But halfway through, his world tilted on its axis. He could hear Karen's phone ring through the car's Bluetooth, the conversation clear. "Hey, baby," a man's voice said. "Hello, stallion," Karen responded with a flirtatious giggle. "You're such a stud!" Jason's heart dropped. What the hell is going on, he thought, stunned. "I can't wait to see you again," the man continued. "Last week was amazing." "I'm glad you liked it," Karen giggled again. "So, are we set for next week?" "Next week?" Jason muttered in shock. "Yeah, it's all set," the man replied. "Did you tell your husband?" "Not yet," she said, sounding too calm. "Don't worry, I've got it all under control." "He doesn't know anything, right?" "Nope," Karen said, the words chilling. "He's too oblivious. I can tell him anything and he'll believe it." Jason's hands clenched around the recorder. His thoughts spun. "She's planning something next week and I'm not involved. This is the week of our 10th anniversary. The man's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I'm almost at the airport now. I'll see you at the hotel tonight, okay?" "I can't wait," Karen replied, excitement in her voice. "Bye, love." "Bye," she said, ending the call. Jason sat motionless, staring at the recorder in disbelief. He played it again, hoping it was a mistake. But no, it was as clear as day. She was having an affair, and it wasn't a one-time thing. She was even planning something for their anniversary week. How long has this been happening? Who is this guy? He grabbed a beer from the fridge and slumped into his chair, trying to make sense of it all. Had he really been so blind to the signs? What else had she hidden from him? He had always respected Karen's privacy, but now everything had changed. He knew where she kept the key to her office, so he went to the bedroom and found it in a drawer in her jewelry box. With a sense of entitlement he had never felt before, he unlocked her desk and began to sift through the papers inside. He was shocked by what he found. Among the documents, he found bank statements. Karen had been saving far more than she ever admitted. She had over $250,000 hidden away, and it wasn't just money. It was the purchases that told a story. A receipt for a men's Rolex watch. Jason didn't remember ever receiving something like that. But maybe her lover did. She'd also bought revealing lingerie, items he'd never seen before. But it didn't stop there. Buried beneath the receipts was something that hit him like a ton of bricks, medical bills from Planned Parenthood. Karen had been pregnant twice in the last 2 years and had terminated both pregnancies, paying cash out of her personal account. Jason's stomach churned. Had one of those pregnancies been his? Then he found the receipt for Plan B pills, purchased just a few days earlier after one of their intimate nights. The final nail in the coffin came when he found a receipt for a large down payment on an apartment in an upscale neighborhood. Was she planning to move out, or was this where she and her lover would escape to? Jason's mind raced. He examined the keys on her key ring, wondering if one was for the apartment. He'd find out soon enough. He powered on her computer, determined to uncover whatever else she was hiding. The passwords list was his next target. Jason accessed Karen's computer and easily logged into her email. Scrolling through, he quickly discovered several messages from Greg Wilson that detailed their sexual encounters. Karen's responses were almost identical each time. The emails, some nearly a year old, lined up with the period when Jason had first noticed changes in Karen's behavior. Initially, their meetings had been in hotel rooms, but it seemed they'd later moved their trysts to houses Karen was selling. Then, Jason found an email from about 6 months ago that gave him a partial answer to a question that had been bothering him. "Did you take care of that little issue?" Greg had asked. "Yes," Karen replied. "I went and had an termination today." "Too bad you didn't keep him," Greg responded. "You could have passed him off as Jason's." "I can't do that," Karen replied. "He thinks I can't have kids. He'd know it wasn't his." Jason's mind raced. He remembered that conversation. It was around the time he'd caught her in a lie. "She's been lying to me for months," he thought, his anger boiling. What a deceitful, manipulative woman. The emails kept coming. At one point, Greg suggested they have sex in Karen's marital bed, but Karen shot down the idea. "I won't do that to Jason," she wrote. Greg persisted. "That idiot doesn't have a clue, does he?" "No," Karen responded. "I'm not doing that." Greg then proposed an idea. "What if you had your own apartment? You could use the commissions to pay for a place and Jason would never notice." Karen seemed to entertain the thought. "You might be onto something," she replied. "I have my own account and Jason never asks about it. I'll see what's available." That had been about 3 months ago. The receipt for the apartment down payment was just over a month old. I bought a condo, she emailed him. I made the down payment and new furniture is coming next week. Jason doesn't know anything. Greg's reply was enthusiastic. Perfect. We'll have to break in every room. Jason leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. The whole situation was beyond what he could have imagined. He kept reading. Greg eventually asked, "Why stay with your husband? Why not just leave him and move in with me?" "I still have feelings for him," Karen responded. "He's a pain, but he treats me well. I bought the condo so we have a private place to meet without worrying about hotel rooms. Besides, you're still married." Greg then promised he'd leave his wife in a heartbeat if Karen asked him to. "We'll see after the conference," Karen said. Jason froze. What conference? He thought, a sick feeling in his stomach. He was about to print the emails and save the receipts when the phone rang. It was Karen. "Hey, baby," she said sweetly. "How's everything? You sound off." "I've got a terrible headache," Jason said, trying to keep his cool. "I just wanted to let you know I'm getting ready for bed," Karen said. "Take something for your headache and get some rest. I love you." "Yeah, me too," Jason muttered, hanging up quickly. He clenched his fist. She has no idea how close I am to exposing her. After the call, Jason decided he needed to find out more about this Greg guy. A quick search on Karen's work website revealed that Greg Wilson was her regional manager. So, she was having an affair with her boss. Jason printed the page, adding it to the pile of evidence. But he couldn't calm down. He needed answers, and he was going to find them. He checked the address for Karen's new condo and found a series of numbers listed under alarm system in her paperwork. Of course she wrote it down, he thought, grabbing latex gloves from the garage. He wasn't leaving any trace. He found the apartment complex easily and parked in her spot. With gloves on, he tried the key that matched and stepped inside. He quickly disabled the alarm using the code he'd found. The place was well decorated, and Jason had to admit, Karen had good taste. Too bad her loyalty isn't as strong as her design skills, he muttered. Of course, there were no photos of him. This was clearly her getaway, a place to escape their marriage. As he wandered through, he noted that there was nothing in the fridge, and the pantry was empty. The apartment was furnished with sleek, modern pieces, and the living room had a large, flat-screen TV. When he entered the bedroom, he immediately noticed the lace curtains she loved, hanging elegantly down to the floor. He glanced down, noticing that the curtains were hanging over the electric heater, and wondered if she'd ever considered the fire risk. He opened the dresser drawers, finding lingerie he'd never seen, as well as men's underwear. He took pictures with his phone, documenting everything. In the nightstand, he found a card from Greg. It read, "Thanks for the watch. Can't wait for your housewarming party. Love, Greg." Fury surged through him. He took a few more pictures, including shots of the toothbrushes in the bathroom and the for him and for her towels on the rack. This was a full-fledged affair. In the second bedroom, there was a desk with some utility bills addressed to Karen. Jason photographed them, noting the address. The windows here were also covered with lace curtains, again hanging over the heater, a fire hazard. He also spotted safety issues. A very old smoke detector in the kitchen and none in the bedrooms. He made sure everything was exactly as it had been when he entered. Once he finished, he reactivated the security system, locked the door, and left. He sat in his car for a while, reflecting on what he had just uncovered. Divorce seemed inevitable now. Even if Karen ended things with Greg and sold the condo, he could never trust her again. Financially, he knew men often lost in divorce settlements, but he had an advantage. Karen made far more money than he did, and he hoped that would help him avoid paying alimony. He planned to consult a lawyer before making any moves, hoping the fact that the condo was only in Karen's name would mean he wouldn't have to sell their house or split it. She had already made it clear that she was no longer committed to their marriage when she secretly bought the condo. No kids meant no custody battles, but Jason still wanted to make sure Karen and Greg faced consequences for their betrayal. Jason had ruled out violence. He didn't want to end up in jail. Back at his place, he looked up Gregory Wilson in the phone book, hoping it was the same Greg. After dialing the number, a woman's voice answered. "Wilson Residence," she said. "Is this Mrs. Wilson?" Jason asked. "Yes, it is," she replied. "Who am I speaking with?" he pressed. "My name is Jason Chandler," he said. "Your husband is the regional manager at Acme Real Estate?" Jason asked. "Yes, he is," she answered. "But he's at a conference this weekend and will be visiting other offices next week. You'll need to contact the regional office and leave a message there." "Actually, Mrs. Wilson, I'm hoping to speak with you. Jason said. "Oh?" she responded, sounding surprised. "Yes, ma'am," Jason continued. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. My wife is having an affair with your husband." "Are you sure about that?" she asked, clearly taken aback. "I'm certain," Jason said, "and I can prove it." "Do you have solid evidence?" she inquired. "I can even show you where they meet if you'd like," Jason offered. He could hear her sigh on the other end. "Would tomorrow work?" she asked after a pause. "Sure," Jason replied. "What time is good for you?" "Let's say 1 p.m., she suggested. Jason gave her the address to Karen's apartment and offered clear directions. "I'll see you then," he said, ending the call with a sense of satisfaction. Once the conversation was over, he sat at his desk and made a to-do list. The first item was clear: change the locks. He planned to get that done before meeting Greg's wife. Though he briefly considered getting drunk, he quickly pushed the thought aside. He grabbed a cold slice of pizza instead, using the time to mentally prepare for what lay ahead. Once finished, he climbed the stairs to bed. The next morning, Jason woke up early, headed to the hardware store, and bought everything he needed to change the locks, as well as a copy of the key to the apartment. By noon, the locks were all replaced. After a quick shower, he grabbed his audio recorder and the printed emails from Karen's account. He was ready to meet Greg's wife. Upon arriving at Karen's apartment, he noticed a woman in a Toyota Corolla nearby. He approached the car and knocked on the window. The woman rolled it down and looked at him. "Are you Christy Wilson?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." "You must be Jason Chandler," she replied. "Yep, that's me," he said, opening the car door for her. "Come with me and I'll show you where they've been meeting." "Just put these on first," Jason added, handing her a pair of latex gloves. "I don't want any fingerprints left behind." "Good idea," she agreed, slipping the gloves on. They walked toward the door, and Jason used the new key to open it. The security alarm deactivated as they stepped inside. Jason led her through the apartment, opening drawers and a closet to reveal Greg's clothes. "Oh my God!" Christy gasped, her voice trembling. "I've been looking for these clothes for weeks. I had no idea where they were disappearing to." "Has he been wearing a Rolex lately?" Jason asked. Christy nodded. "Yes, he said it was a gift from his company." Jason shook his head and pulled out a card from Karen's nightstand. He opened it and showed it to her. Christy read the note, her eyes welling up with tears. "Is this his handwriting?" Jason asked. "Yes," Christy sobbed. Jason then pulled out the emails he had printed, turned on the recorder, and played the audio from the previous Friday. "I'm sorry about all of this," Jason said, offering her a sympathetic hug. She wiped her tears. "It's not your fault," she replied. "I've suspected something was going on, but I didn't have any concrete proof." After a while, Christy regained some composure and asked, So what's your plan?" "I'm divorcing her," Jason said bluntly. "Are you?" Christy asked, her voice firm. "Because as soon as I see that fool, I'm throwing him out of the house." Christy suddenly stopped crying and gave him a sly smile. "I've got an idea." "What is it?" Jason asked, intrigued. "They want to live here together, right?" she said. "Why don't we help them out?" Jason frowned, unsure. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why don't we pack up their things and move them in here?" she suggested, her tone filled with mischief. Jason thought for a moment and then grinned. "I like that idea, but we better hurry. They'll be back in a day or two." She shook her head. "Greg said he'd be gone for a week after the conference. I'm willing to bet Karen will find an excuse to leave too." Suddenly, Jason remembered the recorded conversation. Karen had asked him if he had everything ready for next week, but she hadn't specified what they had planned. "Crap," he muttered, realizing she was probably right. "I guess you're right. Still, I want her stuff out of my house as soon as possible." "I'm with you," Christy said. "Let's meet back here in 3 hours?" "Sounds good," Jason replied. "I'll throw her things in trash bags. I'll be back in 3. "See you then," Christy said, getting up. As Jason watched her leave, he couldn't help but notice her appearance. She was shorter than Karen, with a slender frame and a cute smile. He couldn't understand how Greg had cheated on this woman. They drove to their respective homes, then returned 3 hours later, their cars loaded with bags of Karen and Greg's belongings. They tossed the bags into the second bedroom, not bothering to care about anything breaking in the process. "I didn't bother with Greg's stuff," Christy said nonchalantly. "Me neither," Jason laughed. They shared a high five, and then Jason looked at her with a grin. "I don't know about you, but I'm starving," he said. "Same here," she replied. "I could really go for a big, juicy burger." "A big, fat cheeseburger sounds perfect," Jason said. "I know just the place," she said. Let me treat you. Lead the way, Jason replied. They drove toward the bar he and Ron often visited. Once parked, Christy looked up at the building. A bar? She asked, skeptical. Trust me, Jason said. They make the best burgers around. You'll love it. All right, Christy said, still unsure. Just don't go pouring me booze and taking advantage of me. Jason laughed. As tempting as it sounds, I wouldn't do that to you. Damn, she said, laughing too. They entered the bar and ordered beers, burgers, and fries. As they ate, they exchanged stories about their failed marriages. Christy's story was strikingly similar to his. She had met Greg in college and they married soon after. But while she wanted children, he didn't. Greg started working at Acme Real Estate and Christy took a job in accounts receivable at a home remodeling company. Are you a CPA? Jason asked. She shook her head. No, I never got that far, but it's something I hope to do eventually. Jason shared a bit about his own work. We're always looking for good people. If you send me your resume, maybe we can help each other out. I can do that, Mr. Chandler, she replied, taking a bite of her burger. Just then, his phone rang. He saw it was Karen calling and answered in a neutral tone. Hello? He said. Hey, baby, Karen's voice slurred. She'd clearly been drinking. What are you up to? Just at the bar having a burger, Jason answered. Really? What's wrong with you? She asked. Guess what? I got the Best Salesman Award. I'm happy for you, he replied, keeping his tone flat. They want me to stay in Vegas next week to work with the agents, she continued. Jason immediately knew she was lying. Isn't that great? They're even talking about promoting me to manager soon. Jason thought, of course, on her back. That's great, he said. What about our anniversary? It's coming up this Wednesday, she asked. I know, Jason said, but I understand. Maybe we can celebrate next weekend. Don't worry about it, he added. I know how important your work is. I wouldn't want you to miss anything big. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. Nothing, he said, trying to keep it together. It's just that 10 years of marriage doesn't come around every day. But I understand how much your job means to you. Don't worry about it. Yes, my work is important, Karen said. But I thought you'd be happy for me. I'm very happy, Jason said. Go work with your agents. Don't worry about me. I love you, she said. Yeah, me too, he replied coldly. Bye, she added before ending the call. Jason looked over at Christy. So, that's that. Christy shook her head. She really chose Greg over your anniversary, she said, her hand resting on his. Jason fought back tears. A man he barely knew seemed to care more about him than his own wife did. What a witch, he muttered. I'm sorry, Christy said quietly. Thanks, Jason replied, attempting a weak smile. He pulled out Jerry's business card and dialed the private number. Jerry, he said when the older man answered. It's Jason Chandler. I just talked to Karen. She says she'll be in Vegas for another week. And you don't believe her? Jerry asked. Not for a second, Jason replied. I was just working on your report. I'll have my team watch them and see what they're up to. We'll move forward with it, Jerry said. I've also got something else for you. Your wife and her lover spent the night together. I've got video footage of it. I'll send it over if you want, and it'll be in the full report. Sounds good, Jerry, Jason said. Thanks. He ended the call and turned to Christy. Well, tomorrow we'll find out what's really going on, he said. They spent the night together. My private investigator is going to send me the footage. Would you like to watch it with me? Christy hesitated. Not really, she said. But I feel like I should. Jason nodded. Let's head to my place then. After paying for their meal, they left the bar and drove to Jason's house. By the time they settled into his office, the video had arrived in his email. Would you like something to drink before we watch this? Jason asked. Sure, Christy said. Coca-Cola, if you have it. I'll grab one for you, he replied, heading to the kitchen. He returned with 2 cold Cokes, handing one to her. He started the video, and they both watched in silence as Karen and Greg engaged in various sexual acts. Both Jason and Christy struggled to hold back tears as they saw their spouses enjoying each other's company. What followed was even worse, the pillow talk. So, what do you think our spouses are doing now? Karen asked. If I know Christy, she's probably watching some boring movie or reading one of her dumb books, Greg said. Yeah, I get what you mean, Karen agreed. I bet Jason's sitting there with his dumb spreadsheets or staring at stock reports, Greg continued. You'd think he was trying to save the world or something. Hell, his dad's company sells tires, for Christ's sake. What's so important about that? So, what are you going to say to that a-hole after the awards banquet tomorrow? Greg asked. I'll just tell him I have to stay in Vegas for a week to cover for the local reps. He'll believe it, Karen said. He'd believe anything I tell him. I could say the moon is made of green cheese, and he'd go along with it. And by the time he figures it out, we'll be on a beach in Hawaii, Greg said, grinning. I can't wait to see you in that new bikini you bought. Christy's face contorted with rage. Hawaii? She screamed. That fool's taking that promiscuous to Hawaii. I'm going to rip his balls off. She turned to Jason. Sorry for calling your wife a promiscuous? You don't have to apologize, Jason said coldly. I would have called her the same thing. They continued watching, and Greg's voice came through again. What about your anniversary? Are you just going to blow it off? Hawaii's way more interesting than a night at a steakhouse, Karen said. I'll make it up to him later. Greg looked at her. You're cold, you know that. Karen shrugged. It's just our 10th anniversary. There'll be others. I don't care about that, she added. I need you now. With that, they began again, and Jason shut the video off. I've seen enough, Jason said. Christy nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. More than enough, she whispered. I'm meeting with a divorce lawyer on Monday, Jason said. Do you want to come with me? Do you mind? Christy asked quietly. Not at all, Jason replied. Christy broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Jason put his arm around her and let her cry on his shoulder, fighting his own emotions. He wanted to cry too, but he held back, comforting her the best he could. Do you mind if I stay here tonight? Christy asked. No, Zex. I just want to be held. Of course you can stay, Jason said. Stay as long as you need. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. I can't believe I spent all those years with him. I fell for all his lies. I know exactly how you feel, Jason replied. He led her upstairs to the master bedroom and found an old t-shirt for her to wear to bed. Christy took it and went into the bathroom to change. While she was gone, Jason changed into his pajamas, then climbed into bed. Christy emerged from the bathroom wearing the long t-shirt, and Jason almost gasped when he saw her. He'd always thought Karen had nice legs, but Christy's were the thinnest, most graceful legs he'd ever seen. She smiled as she slid under the covers. Something wrong? She asked. Never seen a woman's legs before? None as perfect as yours, Jason replied. Flattery will get you everywhere, sir, she teased, her voice light. He pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her and inhaling the soft scent of her hair. She rested her hand on his chest, pressing herself closer. You're the only woman I've been in bed with for over 10 years. Besides my wife, he said, his voice almost a whisper. And you're the only man I've been with. Besides my husband, she replied, just as softly. They locked eyes, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. They drifted to sleep in each other's arms, waking up the next morning tangled together. Good morning, sleepyhead, Christy said, her voice still sleepy. Jason stirred and started to get out of bed to use the bathroom, but she added, You don't have to get up on my account. Good morning, beautiful, he replied, smiling. I'll be right back. After a quick trip to the bathroom, which was harder than usual due to the state of his body, he returned to the kitchen. Christy had already cleaned up and was busy cooking scrambled eggs and bacon. Jason checked the clock. It was 8:30 a.m. He watched her move around in his oversized t-shirt and felt a pang of nostalgia for the mornings when Karen used to make him breakfast. Damn, that smells amazing, he said, his stomach rumbling. Hope you don't mind me making myself at home in your kitchen, she said, glancing over her shoulder at him. Not at all, Jason replied, feeling strangely comforted. I can't remember the last time someone made me breakfast. Karen never cooked for you? She asked, looking at him with a hint of curiosity. She did at first, he said. But after a while she stopped. Said it took too much time and she had to clean up for her clients. Which? Christy muttered, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. I agree, Jason said, his voice dry. Christy plated a generous portion of bacon and eggs and set it in front of Jason. He dove into the meal like he hadn't eaten in days. Damn, that was good. You cook like this every morning? He asked, looking up at her. Whenever I can, Christy replied with a grin. Just then, Jason's phone buzzed, breaking their quiet moment. He glanced at the screen and saw Jerry's name flashing. He picked it up. Good morning, Jerry, Jason answered. Working on a Sunday, huh? Jerry's voice came through, accompanied by a laugh. More than I'd like, Jason replied. What's up? Just wanted to let you know your wife and her lover boarded their flight out of Las Vegas just before 6 a.m. They had a short layover in Los Angeles, but they're on their way to Honolulu now. They'll land in about 5 hours. I've got all the flight details if you want them. Yeah, I'll take it, Jason said, his tone cold and controlled. They're on American Airlines Flight 31, Jerry continued. I have a contact in Honolulu who will track them when they land. Thanks, Jerry, Jason said, jotting down the details. He hung up and turned to Christy. Well, here we go. They're on their way to Hawaii, he said, his voice flat. Meanwhile, Karen was sitting back in her seat on the plane, staring out the window as the landscape below changed. The plane was cruising over the Pacific Ocean. This is it, she thought, a mix of excitement and guilt stirring inside her. She glanced over at Greg, who was already asleep beside her. For a moment, her mind wandered back to her marriage with Jason. She had been married for 10 years, and as she closed her eyes, the weight of what she was doing hit her hard. She thought about all the lies, the secrecy, and the betrayal of a man who had trusted her completely. The guilt gnawed at her for a moment, but then she pushed it aside. This was for me, she reasoned. It had to be. Eventually no one would know and everything would go back to normal. Jason wouldn't find out. We'd keep going just like before and someday we'd retire together. Her first lie had been telling Jason she couldn't have children. The truth was, she didn't want them. The thought of motherhood wasn't appealing to her at all, so she made up a story about medical issues. Jason believed her, and eventually, they both agreed not to have kids. She had complications with birth control, tried different methods, but in the end she ended up pregnant twice. The first time she had in termination. She paid for it with her own money, quietly and discreetly. Jason was none the wiser. The second time she got pregnant by Greg. Again she had in termination, and again she paid for it herself. She hoped Jason would never find out about either of them. As for the affairs, she had been faithful for the first 7 years of her marriage. But one day, everything changed. She met a charming, rich client, and before she knew it, they were in bed together. It wasn't something she did often, just a handful of times over the next year and a half. But it felt exciting, and she didn't feel bad about it. She justified it by thinking, if others can do it and get away with it, why can't I? Jason didn't need to know. She still loved him, and what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Then, there was Greg. He was everything Jason wasn't. Jason was careful, calculating, a man with a set plan. Greg, on the other hand, was spontaneous, living for the moment. While Jason had spent his life working for his father, Greg was carefree, with no set career or future plans. But it wasn't just the differences in their lives that drew her to Greg. It was how he made her feel. Where Jason took his time and focused on her pleasure, Greg was quick, demanding, and raw. At first, their secret meetings were held at motels and hotels around town, or occasionally at the house they were trying to sell. But over time, she grew uneasy about being caught. Someone might see them and alert either Jason or Greg's wife, Christy. The tipping point came one night when Jason expressed his worry that their relationship was slipping away. Panicked, she pulled back from Greg, distancing herself emotionally. For a short time, she threw herself into her marriage, but it didn't last long. Greg, eager to start fresh, suggested they find a way to be together more openly, but she feared Jason might discover their affair. She needed a plan, so she decided to buy her own apartment. That way, she'd have a private space for her and Greg, separate from her life with Jason. Greg had suggested using the bed she shared with Jason, but she refused. Even though Jason could be boring and predictable, she still had lingering feelings for him. Besides, the two of them had long agreed to file their taxes separately, which meant she could move out and still maintain some financial benefits. She convinced herself it was a win-win situation. This thinking eventually led her to plan a trip to Hawaii with Greg. She took a week off from work, telling everyone she was going with Jason after their annual company conference. Meanwhile, Greg informed his wife of his own travel plans for the week. Karen, however, lied to Jason, telling him she was heading to Las Vegas. She was confident he wouldn't suspect anything. After all, a few phone calls would cover her tracks. Sure, she'd missed their 10th wedding anniversary, but she promised herself she'd make it up to him when she returned, keeping the secret safe. As the plane soared toward Hawaii, she smiled, thinking about the trip ahead. Greg had bought her a daring bikini for the occasion, one that left little to the imagination. He planned to watch her undress on the beach and even imagined how it might feel to be the center of her attention in that moment. The thought made her feel hot and aroused, and she almost gave in to the temptation to touch herself right then, though she resisted, deciding to wait until later. Checking her phone for any messages or calls, she wasn't surprised to see no texts from Jason. He hated texting and preferred talking on the phone or in person. She chuckled to herself, feeling the plane shake as they hit some turbulence. The nose of the plane dipped and the engine noise changed. Suddenly, she realized something was wrong when she saw the frantic movement of passengers around her. The plane was plummeting. Panic surged through her, and her heart raced. "Oh God," she thought. "This is it. We're going to crash. I'm going to die." Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, and the screams of other passengers filled the air. As the flight attendants rushed to prepare everyone for impact, Karen looked at her phone, tears streaming down her face. She made one final decision. Meanwhile, Jason and Christy had just finished breakfast and were cleaning up the kitchen when they sat down to discuss their next steps regarding their cheating spouses. Jason found himself impressed by Christy's practical and methodical approach to the situation. At that moment, he felt closer to her than he had to Karen in months. Just as he returned with a fresh cup of coffee, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Karen. "Hello?" he answered, putting it on speaker. "Jace!" Karen's voice came through, strained and filled with background noise. It sounded like a commotion was happening on her end. "Yeah, Karen, what's going on?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. Not time. Airplane, down." Her words were abruptly cut off by static and shouting. Before Jason could process what was happening, the line went dead. He stared at the phone in shock, then tried calling her back. The call went straight to voicemail. "Try Greg," he told Christy, who immediately grabbed her phone and called him. She came back a moment later, shaking her head. "Straight to voicemail," she said. Jason rushed to his home office, where he searched for the airline's number. After a few attempts, he finally reached someone who confirmed that they were investigating reports of a plane going down. He provided the details of both Karen and Greg's flights, leaving his contact information and asking to be notified when more details emerged. He also passed on Christie's information. He quickly checked online, but there was no breaking news yet. They walked back to the living room, where Jason flipped through TV channels, but there was nothing yet. His phone buzzed again, and he was soon greeted by a news report about an American Airlines flight to Honolulu, crashing into the Pacific Ocean. There were no specifics, just confirmation of the tragedy. Christy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, God," she whispered, eyes wide with shock. Jason held her tightly, hoping against hope that Karen had somehow survived. Despite everything she had done, he didn't want her to die. An hour later, Jason's phone rang again, interrupting their silent vigil. He turned off the TV and answered. "Mr. Chandler?" a woman's voice asked. "That's me," he said. "I'm calling to confirm that your wife's flight has crashed," she said, her tone somber. "I don't have any further details right now, but we'll get back to you as soon as we have more information." "Thank you," Jason replied, his voice thick. He ended the call and hugged Christy again, tears welling in his eyes. Moments later, Christy's phone rang, and she received the same confirmation. Soon after, his father called. Jason wasn't surprised. His parents often reached out when a big news story broke. "Hey, Jace," his father said. "Hey, Dad," Jason replied. "How are you doing? I just got back from church," his father continued. "Did you see the news about the plane crash?" "Yeah, I saw it," Jason said. "It's terrible." "By the way, how's Karen doing? Isn't she on her way back from Vegas?" his father asked. Jason swallowed hard, the truth finally sinking in. "She's not doing so well right now, Dad. She was on that plane that crashed." "What?" his father gasped. "What was she doing in Hawaii without you?" "She was with her boyfriend," Jason said, his voice breaking. "Oh my God," his father said, his voice filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that, son. Listen, take some time off and deal with all of this. I'll talk to Mike and let him know. If you need anything, just give me a call." "Thanks, Dad," Jason said softly, his mind reeling. Jason ended the call, his emotions swirling. He felt sadness knowing that Karen was likely gone. At the same time, anger burned within him, not just at her for the affair, but also at himself for not standing up to her. Oddly, he wasn't upset by the fact that her pass away meant there would be no divorce, but the realization hit him quickly. He would have to handle all of Karen's final expenses, including the apartment. Damn it, he thought. He turned to Christy, wondering how she would react to everything. What would she do next? A sudden idea popped into his mind, and he walked over to her. "Christy," he said, "how about you sell your place and move in here with me?" She looked up, her eyes red from tears. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Yeah," Jason replied. "I've got an extra room upstairs, and you're going to have a lot to manage over the next few months. Maybe we can help each other through it." She paused, thinking it over. "Why not?" she said finally. "But there's one condition." "What's that?" he asked, puzzled. "You let me sleep with you?" she said softly. Jason blinked in surprise. Everything was moving so quickly, and he wasn't sure if this was the right choice, but then he pushed the doubt aside. "Are you sure?" he asked. "It's been years since I felt truly comfortable with my husband," she admitted. "But last night, for the first time in a long time, I felt satisfied. Is that okay with you?" "It's more than okay," Jason said, feeling an unexpected rush of relief. "Great," she said. "I'll go back to the house, grab my things, and be back tonight." "I'll be here," he replied. Once she left, Jason made a call to Lucy, the office manager where Karen worked. "Hello," Lucy answered. "Hi, Lucy, it's Jason Chandler." "Oh, hi, Jason," she replied. "How was Hawaii?" Jason hesitated, his throat tight. "I don't know. I heard it's nice there." Lucy was confused. "I thought you two were going after the company meeting?" "No," Jason corrected. "Karen went to Hawaii, but not with me. She went with Greg." "What?" Lucy exclaimed, clearly stunned. "Yeah," Jason said, "but neither of them made it. The plane they were on went down in the Pacific today. I'm sure you saw it on the news." "Oh my God," Lucy whispered. "Do you know if she—" "I don't think there are any survivors," Jason said flatly. "I'm so sorry," Lucy said, her voice filled with sympathy. "I'll take care of the insurance paperwork. The company carries life insurance on all employees, so I'll need some information from the airline. Can you get that for me?" "Yeah, I'll get what I can," Jason said, his mind elsewhere. "But I have to ask, did you know about Karen and Greg?" Lucy sighed. "I had a feeling something was going on. There were rumors, but we don't really talk about that kind of thing." "I see," Jason muttered. "That's all I needed to know. I'll be in touch." "Thanks for letting me know, Jason. And once again, I'm sorry for your loss," Lucy said before ending the call. Later that evening, while Jason and Christy were watching TV, a breaking news report flashed on the screen. It showed footage of the plane's final moments, captured by a nearby cargo plane. The video showed the doomed flight spiraling out of control, plummeting nose first before disintegrating on impact with the ocean. The crew of the cargo ship had turned around to search for survivors, but found none. Though they did recover bodies and a large amount of luggage, including Karen and Greg's things. However, neither of their bodies were found. In the months that followed, life for Jason and Christy was a blur of activity. Christy moved in with him and sold her house. Jason was left to deal with the aftermath of Karen's apartment, which held nothing of value to him. He donated everything to Goodwill and eventually sold the apartment, recouping the original amount Karen had paid for it. Both Jason and Christy received $500,000 insurance payouts from Acme Real Estate for the loss of their spouses. Christy quickly settled in, and they began to remove every trace of Karen from Jason's life. Photos were tossed, knickknacks were packed away, and all the furniture was replaced, especially the bed. Family members took what they wanted, and the rest, along with the cars, was either sold, donated, or scrapped. Then came the long process of sorting through Karen's bank accounts. After months of paperwork, Jason finally received a check for about $250,000. Meanwhile, lawyers began circling, hoping to cash in on the accident. An investigation later revealed that the flight crew had misinterpreted warning signals and made critical errors. The plane had been descending at a terrifying rate, 12,000 feet per minute, before it crashed into the ocean at around 135 miles per hour. The whole descent lasted just over 3 minutes. Jason couldn't help but imagine how miserable those last moments must have been for Karen, especially as she realized the enormity of the situation. In his mind, it was too little, too late. Fortunately, the airline settled with the families, providing each passenger's relatives with over $175,000. Jason and Christy ended up with more than $1.6 million. After taxes and other deductions, they still had a sizable fortune. With no bodies recovered, no funeral was held for Karen or Greg. Jason and Christy, however, hosted small memorials for their families. Neither of them shed a tear for their late spouses. 3 months later, Christy left her job and moved in with Jason permanently. By this point, their bond had deepened into a passionate relationship. One evening, while they were out for dinner at a Texas roadhouse, Jason took a deep breath, got down on one knee, and proposed. Christy gasped in joy, and the surrounding diners cheered. "It's about time you made an honest woman of me," she whispered. Jason grinned. "Why?" "Because you're going to be a daddy," she replied. Overcome with emotion, he kissed her passionately. "I love you so much," he murmured. "I love you more," she answered. "Just one favor." "What's that?" he asked, still smiling. "Please don't ask me to fly anywhere," she said with a laugh. Jason chuckled, pulling her close. "Don't worry, honey," he reassured her. "I'm done with flying for a while.